Okay, everybody, thank you for being here for the Montclair City Council meeting on this August the 1st. And as we normally do, we'll begin with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. And the invocation will be done by, I know, Councilmember Denise Johnson. And I believe the Pledge of Allegiance will be done by Mayor Pro Tem Rue. So with that, please stand.
Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you to bring us here today. Thank you for our health and our strength. And now we also thank you for your guidance as you guide us towards making the right decisions for the right people of our community. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. And now, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Rue.
Please join me as we salute the flag of our nation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we please have a roll call?
Councilmember Lopez.
Here.
Councilmember Martinez. Here. Councilmember Johnson.
I'm here.
Mayor Pro Tem Rue.
Present.
Mayor Dutre.
Here.
Thank you.
Next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to speak on any item that's not on the agenda, or if they wish to request to speak on a consent calendar item, they can bring that up as well. And they'll be given 5 minutes to comment. Those who are in the audience, please fill out the blue card and submit it to the speaking card and submit it here in the front. Those who are on a computer, on Zoom, they can go ahead and hit the raised hand feature to request to speak. Those who are on a phone can hit *9. So at this time, I'm going to ask the city clerk if she has any requests to speak.
I have 2 advanced requests to speak. The first one is from Carolyn Raft, who is on Zoom.
Okay, we'll start with Carolyn Raft. And is she there? I don't hear Carolyn's yet. Unmic yourself.
Carolyn, are you there?
There, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I raised my hand, so I don't know. Okay, just a brief update on West Nile virus. Since we are on the heat of summer, we're having more mosquitoes being tested, and we have found 4 in this area carrying West Nile virus. 1 is in Upland, 1 Rancho, 1 in Chino, and Ontario. And so far, since I brought you the last update of the one that we had detected on Lehigh and Amherst, Montclair has no new indication so far of the virus itself. Don't forget, all you beer lovers, while drinking beer outdoors this summer, mosquitoes love you, so don't forget to protect yourself. Also, a little interesting note, the bumblebee has been added to the endangered species list, and it's due to their pollination abilities, and they're starting to get scarce. So if you see one, admire it, stand back, but please don't ever kill one, okay? And that's all I have for now. I have something on the public later in the next thing coming up, so I will talk to you in a few minutes.
Thank you. And thank you for the update from the mosquito, the West Vector Control Board. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, let's go to our next speaker. Do we have an?
Okay, I did have an advanced request to speak from Vincent Tsai. I do not see that name on our list, though.
Did he call in or?
He submitted an online speaker request card, and it said he was introducing himself, and he's running for Senate, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, his email has Cy for Senate, so that's all
Okay.
the information I have on him.
All right, so nobody else
Yeah.
is requesting to speak, I can see, so we will move on with the agenda. And the next item on the agenda is public hearings, is to consider adoption of resolution number 22-3374. I know staff's going to do a presentation on this item, and I appreciate the I wasn't here at the last meeting where there was a workshop on the poll that was conducted. However, I have read that PowerPoint presentation, gone through it, and I do believe I understand that. So at this time, I'm going to have the city manager go through his presentation. Once he's done, then we'll open it up to public hearing, which in fact I'll open the public comments for the public hearing. And then after that, we'll come back to the council with questions, and then we'll follow by discussion. So, Mr. Starr, why don't you lead off?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. In front of you on the dais is a revised copy of the agenda report for this evening. Most of the information is what you're already familiar with. There are some changes. I will be going through that through my presentation this evening, so you will be fully aware of what those changes are, the content of the changes, and the recommendations related to proceeding as you consider this item this evening. You are asked to consider resolution number 22-3374. This is the cannabis tax measure that would be placed before the voters for their consideration for a tax up to 10%. Of course, that number can be adjusted by the council by act of resolution. Resolution number 22-3375. This is an advisory opinion asking the voters whether or not they even want cannabis legalized for medical and adult use in the community, and the council can then deal with the opinion of the residents related to that advisory opinion. And ordinance number 22-999, that is the ordinance that would impose the tax measure, the tax that is part of resolution number 22-3374, and it would be the bill that would, or the law that would be enacted by the City Council if the City Council chooses to move forward on resolution number 22-3374. So I want to give you a little bit of background first and give you a framework of where the city staff is as it relates to the potential legalization of commercial cannabis businesses in the city. You will recall that back in 2019, the council did conduct a series of special meetings regarding compliance with Proposition 64, which of course is the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. The acronym is ALMA, and I may use that acronym during the course of the presentation this evening. And the potential for a series of draft ordinances that the city had presented to both the City Council and actually presented them to the Planning Commission. In fact, the Planning Commission did make a recommendation for approval of the ordinances that were presented to them. Collectively, those ordinances are known as the Medicinal Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Law, or the McCursel of the City of Montclair, regulating commercial cannabis businesses in the city. Proposed ordinance number 19982 is the comprehensive ordinance, the primary regulatory ordinance that the city was proposing. It established the primary framework for a regulated commercial cannabis marketplace in the city. Proposed ordinance number 19983 was the land use ordinance, which would define the operational areas in which cannabis would be permitted to operate in the community. And ordinance number 19-984, which is the comprehensive secondhand smoke control ordinance that effectively controlled where cannabis could be used in the community. As you know, you cannot smoke cannabis under Proposition 64. It's not permitted to be used in public areas. And this ordinance reflects that, but it also addresses secondhand smoke in relation to not just cannabis, but cigarette smoking as well. At the conclusion of the presentation of those ordinances to the City Council, the Council directed that the draft ordinances be tabled for further consideration as the city watches the progress of cannabis across the state and how the regulatory process is developing statewide. Council also wanted staff to provide staff with opportunity to develop an appropriate tax and fee-based revenue scenario for cannabis businesses, which is part of resolution number 22-3374 being presented to you this evening, and survey likely voters on the level of support for legalized medical and adult use cannabis in the city of Montclair. And of course, as you know, a presentation was conducted at a workshop that covered the results of that polling that was conducted by FM3. California's migration to legalization of cannabis. And again, a little bit of history as to how we got here. Back in 1996, Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act, was approved by voters for the medicinal use of cannabis for persons 18 years of age and older with a physician's recommendation, followed by 2004's SB 420, the Medical Marijuana Program Act, which implemented provisions of the Compassionate Use Act. Then in 2015, the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act was passed. This is the act that inspired a lot of cities to adopt ordinances that either would prohibit or allow commercial cannabis activities within their respective communities. Montclair, of course, at that time adopted a ordinance that prohibited cannabis in the city of Montclair. 2016, Proposition 64 was passed by the voters. This is the Control, Regulate, and Tax Adult Use Marijuana Act, or the ALMA, as I referenced earlier. And then in 2017, SB 94, the Medicinal Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, the MCRSA, which repealed the 2015 Act, the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, in favor of the provisions contained within Proposition 64 that was approved by the voters. As it relates to Proposition 64, as I indicated, that measure went before the voters in the November 6, 2016 general election. It was approved by California voters, and it provides a comprehensive regulatory framework for the licensing, control, and taxation of adult use commercial cannabis activities in the state of California. The voter results are as indicated, statewide, 57.13% in support. San Bernardino County mirrored that, 57.13% in support, and in the city of Montclair, the level of support was 53.1% support. The Proposition 64 authorizes a person 21 years of age or older to be involved in the adult use of cannabis, to possess up to 28.5 grams of cannabis and up to 8 grams of concentrated cannabis, and to possess up to 6 living cannabis plants per household. For medicinal purposes, persons 18 years of age or older are authorized to use cannabis with a doctor's recommendation, and they can have 12 or more living cannabis plants, again, based on the doctor's recommendation. This leads us to the public opinion survey on cannabis, which was conducted by FM3, and a presentation was provided at a workshop a few weeks ago, and I will briefly summarize what the results of that opinion survey were. At the March 7, 2022 meeting of the City Council, Council approved agreement number 22-15 with Fairbank, Moslin, Mullen, Metz & Associates, which is FM3, for polling, educational, and outreach services to conduct a community issue survey regarding the legalization and taxation of cannabis in Montclair. Surveying the attitude of residents complies with past positions taken by City Council members to provide voters the right to opine on the legalization of cannabis in Montclair. Survey was conducted between April 24 to May 16 of this year, and the results were presented at that workshop on July 18th. The overall margin of error of survey was plus minus 5.2% for the full sample survey, and plus minus 7.4% for the half sample survey. The results of the survey were conducted in both English and Spanish, and were generally highly favorable, with a high level of satisfaction for the Montclair city government overall. Respondents continued to believe that Montclair is generally headed in the right direction, with 57% of those agreeing, 21% disagreeing, and 21% unsure. When respondents were asked the same question in July of 2020, the results were 61% right direction, 17% disagreeing, and 22% unsure. And FM3 attributed the slight decline in the favorability rating not to local issues, but to nationwide issues, such as high inflation, interest rates, and gas prices. So at looking at each of those issues, even at the local level, voters are somewhat unhappy with government generally, and so that was reflected in the poll results. Nonetheless, 6 in 10 respondents continue to believe that things are headed in the right direction for the city of Montclair. There is also a decrease in the percentage of residents who know that it is illegal to sell cannabis products in the city of Montclair, with only 16% saying that it is legal to sell cannabis, but even more dismaying, 27% say that it is not legal to sell cannabis. That's a very small number of the population recognizing that it is not legal to sell cannabis, and 56% are unsure. So there's a whole large group of people out there who simply don't know one way or the other. FM3 attributes this decline in voter perception regarding the legal status of cannabis in Montclair to a misunderstanding of how Proposition 64 is applied. The wider perception that cannabis businesses are legal in Montclair is based on the following. Some respondents believe that Proposition 64 made cannabis legal statewide. It did not. It is legal statewide if local jurisdictions approve it within their respective communities. Cannabis is widely available in Montclair through mobile delivery services. That is true. Even though the legalization of cannabis is not something that the city of Montclair has agreed to, cannabis still flows into the community, and you will see that in the next slide. A significant number of communities in Los Angeles and Riverside counties have legalized cannabis businesses. In fact, Riverside County, I believe more than half of the cities in Riverside have approved legalization of cannabis, and in Los Angeles County, approximately 29 to 30 cities have approved the legalization of cannabis out of about 85 cities in that particular county. Overall support for allowing businesses in Montclair has increased from 54% in June of 2020 to 60% in the recent FM3 survey that was conducted. Support also appears to increase to as high as plus or minus 70% following some degree of education and the purpose and scope of what Proposition 64 is about. When asked the following sample ballot question, 70% indicated some level of affirmative support for the tax measure, with more than 40% saying that they definitely would vote for it, and the balance indicating that they would likely vote for it. I'm not going to read the measure. It was discussed at at length at the workshop presentation, but I think you're familiar with it, and it reflects essentially what is in the question to the voters if the council approves resolution number 22-3374 this evening. 70% level of support indicates a proposed general tax measure for cannabis would meet the threshold needed to pass, which is 50% plus one. Furthermore, support for a cannabis measure is found across all household income groupings. In addition to FM3's demonstration of local support for the legalization and taxing of cannabis, national polling continues to demonstrate growing support for the legalization of cannabis at both the federal and state levels. The most recent series of national polls, including the ones listed here, demonstrate that Americans of all genders, education levels, racial groups, age, and political affiliation support federal and/or state legalization of medical adult use of cannabis, with younger Americans obviously more supportive, and moderates, liberals, and independents more supportive than conservatives, although across every political spectrum, the support is well above 50% for cannabis, the legalization of cannabis. You can see in the polls a marijuana economist YouGov poll conducted in July 22, 60% support. Cannabis Standards poll conducted June 22, 78% support. A YouGov America polling conducted in May 2022, 70% support. Marijuana in the American Public 2022 SSSR.com polling, 69%. CBS News poll conducted in April 2022, 66%. And the CPAR national poll conducted in February 2022, 67%. So higher than the numbers in Montclair, at least prior to education, but certainly equal to what the support would be for a tax measure. Given the growing strength of support for cannabis legalization as demonstrated by the polling data, not only at the national level, by also that information data provided by FM3, city staff has concluded that a local ballot measure on the issue of legalization as well as on taxing of cannabis would be viable when placed before the voters for the November 8, 2022 general municipal election. Next section discusses placing a cannabis tax measure before Montclair voters. At its regular meeting following the conclusion of the FM3 workshop on July 18, 2022, Council did direct that the city manager present at today's meeting a resolution ordering the submission to the voters of the city a measure to consider a general business license tax on commercial retail sales of cannabis at the general election scheduled for November 8. In order to place a tax measure on the ballot, the City Council must approve a resolution, that resolution 22-3374, and the city clerk must provide to San Bernardino County Registrar of Voters a certified copy of that resolution no later than August 12, 2022. Pursuant to California Elections Code, Section 9222, the council has the authority to place local measures on the ballot to be considered at a municipal election. Pursuant to Proposition 218, council has the authority under the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, Proposition 218, a tax measure, and pursuant to Government Code Section 53724, Proposition 62, and Revenue and Taxation Code Section 7285.9, a 2/3 vote of all members of the city council, 4 votes in this case, is required to place a tax measure on the November 8, 2022 ballot. So 4 members of the city council would have to vote for resolution number 22-3374 in order for it to go forward for the voters to consider whether or not cannabis would be taxed. However, I do need to emphasize that just because that resolution or that measure would go forward, it doesn't legalize cannabis. It just states that if cannabis is legalized in the city of Montclair, then you will have the right to tax it up to 10%. And the council, again, by resolution, can adjust what that tax rate is from 0% up to 10%. You cannot exceed 10%. If the council chooses not to tax it, again, because the other measure we'll be talking about is not approved by the voters, that would be a decision by the council. This particular table provides the timeline related to the ballot measure and how it moves forward. So the assignment of the letter will be conducted by the Registrar of Voters no later than August 15. Deadline to withdraw the measure, August 17th. The impartial analysis to be submitted, August 22. The argument submission deadline is August 22. The rebuttal submission deadline is August 25. And the end of 10-day public examination period for the arguments is September 1. And for the rebuttals, September 5. Now I'm entering into discussion of resolution number 22-3374. This, again, is the resolution related to the cannabis tax, not to the legalization issue. If approved by council by 4 or more votes, the measure would be submitted to voters of the city of Montclair at the general municipal election to be held on November 8th, and the measure would read as follows. Shall the measure funding general Montclair services, including supporting 911, police, fire response, preventing thefts, property crime, recruiting, retaining firefighters, paramedics, retaining local business jobs, repairing streets, potholes, addressing homelessness by taxing cannabis retail, delivery, cultivation, manufacturing, testing businesses at a rate of not more than 10% of gross receipts, raising about $3.5 million annually until ended by voters, requiring audits, spending disclosure, funds used locally, cannabis businesses follow laws protecting public health and safety, be adopted. Yes or no? Obviously, if it's 50% plus 1 for yes, then the council has the authority to tax. If it's no, if it falls below the 50% threshold for support, and it's 50% plus 1 against, then the council does not have the authority to tax. Resolution number 22-3374 also includes following language that allows staff to satisfy other legal requirements and to facilitate submission. The impartial analysis, the city clerk is directed to transmit copies of the measure to the city attorney, and the city attorney will prepare an impartial analysis of the measure, not to exceed 500 words in length, showing the effect of the measure on existing law and the operation of the measure. The impartial analysis must be filed, again, as I indicated earlier, by Monday, August 22. Arguments and rebuttals. Any and all members of the city council, an individual voter who is eligible to vote on the measure, a bona fide association of citizens, or a combination of voters and associations may file a written argument for or against the measure, not exceeding 300 words, and that must be submitted to the city clerk no later than Monday, August 22. Rebuttal arguments not exceeding 250 words concerning the measure shall be submitted to the city clerk no later than Thursday, August 25. Public examination. This is the 10-day public examination period that I spoke of earlier. The impartial analysis and the arguments and rebuttals for and against the measure will be available for public examination for the 10-day calendar periods as indicated for the arguments. Thursday, September 1 is the end of the 10-day period, and Monday, September 5 is the end of the 10-day examination period for rebuttals. This now moves us into a discussion of ordinance number 22-999. This is the ordinance that would implement the tax should the voters agree on approval of the tax measure. This simply identifies and outlines the structure of what the ordinance contains without getting into the specific details, and obviously a copy of the ordinance is included in your agenda packet. Under provisions of the enabling ordinances adopted by the council at a future date, those would be the ordinances related to legalization. Ordinance number 22-999 would then impose a gross receipts tax on the following commercial cannabis businesses within the city's jurisdiction: cultivation, manufacturing, testing, delivering, and selling. And again, even though the voters may approve resolution number 22-3374, the taxing measure, and the council approves this ordinance, nothing goes into place unless the council enacts a different set of enabling ordinances that provide for the licensing of cannabis. And that is something that you will deal with later on in the future, not now. That's not part of what you are acting on this evening. So the legalization of cannabis is a question for the voters to provide you an opinion on, and then you as a body get to decide later on as to whether or not you're going to pass those ordinances. The tax would be imposed on gross receipts of commercial cannabis businesses up to a maximum of 10%. The tax would not apply to cannabis sales for medicinal use. We are prohibited by state law from taxing the medicinal use of cannabis. Montclair, again, does not currently have the enabling ordinances regulating the conduct of commercial cannabis businesses in the city. Therefore, unless and until those enabling ordinances are enacted, we would not be imposing any tax because there are no businesses to impose the tax on. Furthermore, without the enabling ordinances, the city lacks a range of enforcement capabilities that otherwise would be available through a licensing program. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to halt here briefly. I think that it's probably important that the council member, Mayor Pro Tem Rue, also be here.
We'll take a 3-minute break. You probably need a breather anyways, right, Ed?
A drink of water.
Have a drink of water. What's that? Oh. Well, maybe we can do that. Wait for Bill to come back. Vincent, did you want to address the council? Okay. All right, we'll come back and close. We'll come back to session. Come up, Vincent. I'll let you speak under public comment this time, general public comment. We don't normally do this, but we're being nice today. But go ahead. You have 5 minutes, and it's all yours.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Vincent Tsai. I'm a candidate for California State Senate, District 22. I'm here really with no agenda other than to introduce myself to you. I was fortunate enough to get enough support and votes to be in the top 2 to make it to the general election. And right now, I'm doing what I can to get my name out there because I know there's still a lot of people that don't know who I am yet. I decided to run for office not because I ever had plans to be a politician. I'm currently a deputy with the LA County Sheriff's Department, and I decided to run for office because I'm a public servant, and my scope as a law enforcement officer only goes so far. With the amount of things that are happening right now, with the amount of struggles people are going through, I felt like the way I can make the most impact and positive change is to run for office. I come into this race with no political experience. I have no aspirations of becoming president or governor or making a lot of money. My heart is intent on making positive change. I've seen the struggles that people have gone through, working in the custody facilities of LA County and also working the streets of places like Linwood, Florence Firestone, Walnut, Diamond Bar, Rosemead. I've seen the struggles that people go through on a day-to-day basis. Right now, we have a huge issue with crime, and I haven't seen any credible solutions to this increasing problem. And I feel like with my knowledge and experience in Sacramento, I can create solutions that can be implemented to help reduce the amount of crime that's going on right now. Where I live, there's been a rash of crimes that have never happened there before. I live in a very safe community. I've only been there for about 2 years now. My neighbors who have lived in that community for 20 plus years have never seen the kind of things that are happening right now. Car break-ins, catalytic converter thefts, and also I even had a shooting right outside my door last year. Unheard of, and it's only getting worse. I also want to do whatever I can to help people out at the pump. Doing things like reducing the gas tax. It's not a huge fix, but it's something that'll move us in the right direction. I mean, people are hurting right now, myself included. And I really want to get into office to give people some hope and to provide some solutions that we can use to make things better. With the homeless issue, right now, we're throwing money at that issue, but nothing's gotten better. I mean, from 2018 to 2021, we've spent about $12 billion on homelessness, but yet the problem only gets worse. What I found in my research on the homeless issue is that a majority of the people that are out there on the streets right now, yes, there's a small percentage of people that are normal people just like you and me that had an unfortunate turn of events and now they're without a job and without a home. But overwhelmingly, it's an issue with mental health and drug abuse. And for a lot of people, it's those two things combined. We really need to start keeping the organizations that are getting paid through grants to fix a homeless issue. We need to keep them accountable and make them show that the money that we're giving them is being put to use. We need to start seeing some results. So I'm really happy to be here. This is the first city council meeting I've been to where I'm speaking. I'm happy that it's in Montclair. It's the most eastern city in my district, and I hope to get to know all of you guys soon. Thank you.
Great. Good luck, and thank you.
Sure.
Mayor, real briefly,
Go ahead.
I just want to thank you for doing that. You are the first candidate since the June primary to come before us and introduce themselves. No other candidate has. I would welcome any other candidate come and do so for all offices, but thank you for that. Being that you're in law enforcement, you'd be a great addition to our police department here in town. Best of luck to you, sir.
Okay, we'll get back to the presentation from the city manager on the public hearing.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Mayor.
the public hearing, I'll reopen the public hearing to make Diane happy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So again, just to go over the last part of this particular slide, the cannabis tax would be imposed on gross receipts of commercial cannabis businesses up to that maximum of 10%. And again, by resolution, the council could adjust that tax rate anywhere from 0 up to 10%. And the tax would not apply to cannabis sales for medicinal use, again, because that is prohibited by law. Montclair does not currently have the enabling ordinances regulating the conduct of commercial cannabis businesses in the city. Therefore, unless and until those enabling ordinances are enacted, the city is unable to license commercial cannabis businesses in the city and to derive any tax revenue pursuant to ordinance number 22-999. Furthermore, without those enabling ordinances, the city lacks a range of enforcement capabilities that would otherwise be available through a licensing program. The maximum rate of the cannabis tax would be calculated as follows. As you can see, for each of the different types of businesses, the rate would be a maximum of 10%. And again, the council would have the flexibility by resolution to adjust that rate at any time that the council decides that they want to, anywhere between that range of 0 to 10%. You can also adjust it per business category. So it doesn't have to be across the board for all of the businesses. So for example, you could go back to, you could go to cultivation and say you just want to do 3% on cultivation, testing 1%, retail 10%, distribution 10%, manufacturing 5%, and however you chose to break it down in that way. Placing a cannabis legalization and licensing advisory measure before Montclair voters. This is resolution number 22-3375. Copy of the resolution has been provided to you for your review. And this is an advisory measure. If the resolution is approved by the City Council by 3 votes or more, the advisory measure would be submitted to voters of the City of Montclair at the general municipal election, also held on November 8th, along with the companion measure, resolution number 22-3374. The language in the measure simply says, shall the Montclair City Council consider and approve ordinances legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis businesses in the city? Yes or no? 50% 1+ vote for would mean that the council has the right to consider. 51 plus 1 vote for no would mean that the city council makes their decision one way or the other, again, because it's an advisory opinion. Resolution number 22-3375 includes language that would allow staff to complete. And I also want to say that the reason why it's advisory is because it's a policy decision. And the council cannot really give up their authority on 2 issues: policy decisions and fiscal operations. Those are issues that the council has to deal with and not give up those responsibilities. This is a policy issue. You can ask for an advisory opinion, and you can follow that advisory opinion if that is the decision of the City Council. Impartial analysis. The city clerk will be asked again, as with the other, to conduct an impartial analysis, prepare an impartial analysis. Arguments and rebuttals, again, the same timelines with resolution number 22-3374. Same requirements, same standards. Don't need to go over those since I already did. Same thing on the public examination period, same timelines that the public gets to review the measure. Current status of commercial cannabis activity in the City of Montclair. In March of 2017, again, this is in response to the MMSAA, the Montclair Council adopted ordinance number 17-968, adding chapter 11.11 and title 11 to the municipal code, prohibiting uses related to medical cannabis dispensaries, cultivation and processing, commercial cannabis activities, delivery of cannabis and cannabis-related products, and outdoor cultivation of cannabis in the city. Under Proposition 64, these prohibitions, particularly against delivery of cannabis, no longer apply. The city cannot prohibit the use of public roads for the delivery of cannabis to customers in Montclair for adult or medical use by cannabis vendors operating inside or outside of the city if those vendors are licensed by the state of California. In this particular slide, you can see the number of businesses operating around us that provide dispensary services, and these businesses are constantly flowing into each one of these communities, providing cannabis for both medicinal and adult use. It's there. You've heard speakers talk about how it doesn't matter whether or not it's approved in the City of Montclair for legalization. It's delivered, and the city has to commit resources to deal with it, and we also derive no revenue from it. So it's already there, and there's nothing that we can do as a municipality to enforce against it because we have no enforcement capabilities related thereto.
Mr. City Manager, real quickly, back to that slide. You stated these were businesses that already operate in the area. Are those noted by the shopping cart on the graph?
Those are cars.
Well, no, but there's shopping carts. As far as businesses, I only see one noted marijuana plant signifying, I would assume that's the dispensary? You said this notated businesses that already operated in the city. Which of the of the?
Every one of the green ones
Are
is
they-
a delivery
Okay,
business.
all right. that's what I
And the
wanted to know.
reason why there are so many is because delivery businesses don't have to have a storefront under Proposition 64. And in many instances, all they need to have is a state license, not a local license, because of the nature of the business and its lack of a storefront.
And what were the shopping carts? I'm sorry.
I really can't respond to that. I was only looking at the delivery businesses,
fair enough,
which
fair
are in the
enough.
green. I presume the shopping carts probably represent that even though it's not a storefront, maybe there's some advertisement on the web that you can go to and directly shop on the web for those respective businesses. Again, because there's no storefront, you can't go in and shop. So I would suspect that the shopping cart represents a internet site. The city's current municipal code also expressly prohibits all personal cannabis outdoor cultivation, all non-medical commercial cannabis cultivation, uses and services related to cannabis, and smoking and ingesting cannabis or cannabis products in public places within the city of Montclair. Under Proposition 64, these prohibitions under the municipal code are effectively no longer valid. Each household can cultivate up to 6 cannabis plants for personal use and for gifting, or 12 or more cannabis plants based on a doctor's recommendation for medicinal use for a patient under a doctor's care. We've already discussed, obviously, the delivery component, and the medical and adult use and consumption of cannabis is permitted in non-public places. Voter approval of the proposed cannabis tax measure would not permit commercial cannabis activities to operate in the city without having first obtained a state-issued permit. I've discussed that at earlier parts of this presentation. The approval of the tax doesn't mean that businesses can come in and operate in Montclair, which is the reason for the advisory opinion. The advisory opinion, obviously, either way it goes, is relevant to the tax issue because the advisory opinion makes it clear that the city of Montclair must first enact the enabling ordinances in order for it to be legalized. So if you just did the tax measure, then potential businesses could argue to the state of California that Montclair has adopted a tax measure endorsing legalization of cannabis in their communities, and they could apply to the state of California tax measure. The advisory measure has the citizens rendering an opinion as to whether or not they want you to consider the legalization of cannabis, which sends a signal that, okay, until the council makes a decision one way or the other based on the voter response, cannabis businesses in the city remain illegal until that city council takes that action. Recent state activity related to promotion of commercial cannabis businesses. California's fiscal year 2022-23 budget attempts to stabilize the legal cannabis markets by eliminating the cultivation tax. However, in 3 years, the tax could begin raising other cannabis, the state could begin raising other cannabis taxes to make up for that lost revenue, with funds designated to child care programs, environmental cleanup programs, and impaired driving prevention efforts. Recipients of social equity license intended to diversify dispensary ownership are eligible to claim a $10,000 tax credit for the next several years to help their businesses develop. And Senate Bill 827 would deny cities that prohibit commercial cannabis cultivation and sales from receiving law enforcement grants from states out of the legal cannabis revenues that are generated. The state legislature is also considering other measures that would either penalize local agencies for failing to legalize commercial cannabis activities or impose requirements that would either create opportunities for commercial cannabis sales statewide, regardless of the position of local governments. Fiscal impact. Preparation of the 2 ballot measures will entail publication and ballot consolidation costs through the San Bernardino County Registrar of Voters Office. General fund costs assessed by the San Bernardino County Registrar of Voters are not expected to exceed $50,000 or $25,000 for each measure as it relates to placing these measures on the November 8th ballot. Staff estimates that if commercial cannabis activities were allowed to operate in the city of Montclair, could generate up to $3.5 million annually. Funds generated by the general business license tax and commercial retail sales would be committed to the general fund to support general businesses, as we've discussed previously. Staff's recommendation is to consider adoption of resolution number 22-3374. This measure orders submission to the voters of Montclair, a measure to consider a general business license tax on commercial retail sales of cannabis. That measure would go before the voters at the November 8th, 22 election. Directs the city attorney to prepare an impartial analysis of the measure and provides for the filing of arguments and rebuttal arguments in favor of and against the measure. You're also asked to consider first reading of ordinance number 22-99, which would add the specified chapter to the title to Title IV. This ordinance would impose a cannabis business license tax subject to final voter approval of that measure at the November 8th, 22 election. You're also asked to consider setting a public hearing for second reading of ordinance number 22-999 for Monday, August 15, 2022 at 7 p.m. And you were asked to consider adoption of resolution number 22-3375, ordering submission to the voters of Montclair an advisory measure for the City Council to consider and approve ordinances legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis businesses in the city, directing the city attorney to prepare the impartial analysis of the advisory measure, and provide for the filing of arguments and rebuttal arguments in favor of and against the advisory measure. That concludes my comments.
Well, thank you very much. This time, we're going to allow members of the public to speak. If anybody wishes to speak on this item, please, if you're on the computer, on Zoom, please hit the raised hand feature to request to speak. You're on the phone, hit *9 to request to speak. If you're in the audience, feel free to submit a speaking card here to the front, or wave your hand right if you wish to speak. So at this time, I'm going to give it to the city clerk.
Okay, so I had two advanced requests to speak. The first one is from Carolyn Raft, and the second one is Mark Ramos. And then Bruce Culp is also raising his hand on Zoom.
Okay. So it looks like currently we have 3 speakers, so we will start with the first one then, you wish.
Okay, Carolyn, are you there?
Carolyn Raft. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Yeah.
Carolyn, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm glad to say the City Council and staff are finally going forth with the cannabis tax to be voted on, and that the revenue is going to such important public safety and health issues that's needed. The survey percentages look promising, so good luck in the November election for this measure. We will keep our fingers crossed for its passing. People are going to use marijuana whether it's legal or they're not legal. So we might as well take any kind of advantage that we can in order to gain money from it to use for these good causes. So, and that way we also can control the locations it's going to, and also these illegal businesses, hopefully we can continue keeping them under control, or try anyway. And so good luck, and I hope everything goes well. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll get that. And we'll mute her, please. Thank you. And then,
Okay, so our next speaker was Mark Ramos. Let me see if I can find him. There he is.
okay, Mark Ramos. He has to unmute
Hey,
himself. Please
Mr.
unmute
Ramos?
yourself. Looks like he's unmuted.
There
Hello,
we
Mark.
go.
How you
Yeah.
doing?
Good evening, folks.
All
Good
right.
evening, Mayor,
You have
City
5
Council,
minutes.
City Manager, and staff.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time. I want to thank you for your going forward with these 2 issues. As I spoke at the last meeting, although on the tax measure it says up to 10%, I would encourage you to consider a lower number to start out with. There is a big push in the industry to lower taxes. 80% of the market is still operating illegally, unlicensed. The city of San Francisco has put a pause on their tax. There's a fight in Long Beach and other cities. So taxation is a big deal for the industry right now. For the good operators, those folks trying to do the right thing, So I would ask that you consider a lower rate on the ballot, or even if it passes, consider a lower rate. Would love to work in consultation with the city manager and staff. I am going to make a few comments because it's not always easy to get in front of you folks with your busy schedules to have a conversation. As some of you know, I am the president of United Food Commercial Workers, Local 1428 in Claremont, California. We represent folks who work in the grocery stores, Albertsons, Ralph's, Vons, Stater Brothers, Food for Less, CVS, Rite Aid. But we also represent over 10,000 workers in the cannabis industry from one end of the country to the other. The only union to endorse Prop 64. We have been advocates for good policy, strong policy, and good ordinances. Very proud of the work that we did in partnership with the city of Pomona. That has recently, I misspoke last time I spoke in front of you. I said that Steezy was going to present a check of over $300,000, but actually I was thinking it was a whole year, but it's only actually 8 months. So it was actually an 8-month accounting period, but the check itself was for over $200,000. And Steezy expects that check next year to be probably double that. Steezy is a good union employer, represents over 85 employees, and as is Catalyst there in town. But there are just so many good things that you can do, and so many few opportunities that you'll have as elected officials to really, really put good policy in place where you get a lot of the say in things, especially when it comes to a private employer or private industry wanting to operate in your city. I would also encourage you to think conservatively. Don't overshoot on the amount of licenses that you're going to issue. A lot of times, some cities issue too many licenses. You become oversaturated, and you end up with empty licenses. Or people get a license and they sell it immediately. They flip the license. So a good small conservative number is always a good practice to start out with. But as I said earlier, would really love the opportunity to work with the city manager and staff and council, Mr. Mayor and folks, to just share our ideas. I won't come in front of you and I will never push push an operator on you. What I'm here to do is advocate for a policy that I think is good for our communities, good for our region, good for our workers, and really, really brings a lot of good to our communities when it's done right. And I think the city of Montclair has a very unique opportunity. Again, I would encourage a yes vote on the tax measure. The city of Claremont is moving forward also with a tax measure, which means they're also considering this idea of legalizing recreational adult use cannabis. So thank you for your time. And again, as I said earlier, please consider a lower tax, but appreciate your time and appreciate all of your efforts on this. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And next speaker, please.
Okay, and next was Bruce Culp.
Bruce Culp. I think I've heard of that name.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. As I've spoken before, I'm not sure whether these ordinances are going to make a difference in the city. People are already, ultimately what you guys are going to vote for today isn't whether it's legal or not to use recreational or medical use cannabis. That's already been decided long ago. So that was kind of confusing here when you were talking about an ordinance for legalizing cannabis. It's probably for legalizing retail sales of it is what I'm guessing, because it's completely legal for people to possess up to certain amounts, grow up to a certain number of plants in the city of Montclair. That's not even a debate anymore. That's law. And so that's already happening. What you guys are really deciding is whether to put this up to the voters to decide. And I know that Mr. Rue has spoken many times about the importance of letting the voters decide. So ultimately, I'm guessing that there's going to be a 5-0 vote today, because everybody there on the council supports the right of people to vote for the things that they want and don't want in the city. That's why you guys are elected officials. Guessing you're putting your trust in the residents, some of you, this year to vote for you. So give the residents of Montclair that ability too. As you know, time and time again, we voted in favor of cannabis use here in the state. As residents of Montclair, we've overwhelmingly voted for Prop 64, 215. You saw all the different measures and ordinances and propositions that not only the state but in our city, you can look at the statistics and know that we've overwhelmingly voted in favor of this. So as elected officials, that the residents that you represent, minimum of 70% of them want this for you. So I'm guessing that you will not go against the will of the voters and go with a 5-0 vote tonight. And all you're really doing is just moving on to a second hearing. And really, nobody's really decided anything at this point in time. So I hope you guys go ahead and do that. Ultimately, the decision that's are going to be made, like I said, it's not going to be whether people use marijuana in cannabis products in the city. It's really whether, if they do purchase it, whether that money goes to firefighters, and police and health initiatives. And so if those things are important to you, I hope you'll vote in favor of these ordinances, because that's really all you're going to change, is not the use of cannabis in the city, but where that money goes. And hopefully it will help out and benefit the community. So please stay in touch with the residents that you're representing. The 70%, 7 out of 10 homes next to you are in favor of this, and you need to listen to them. I know that I'll be actively working for promoting candidates that definitely are in favor of this, and working against those who vote against this. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I believe we have one more speaker.
Yes, so
Second.
the next one is Matthew Nathaniel on Zoom.
Hello, Matthew. And just unmute yourself, please. Please unmute yourself, Matthew. There you are. Hello, Matthew. Do you hear us?
Hello,
We can
good
hear you.
evening.
It's all yours.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I appreciate the work that has gone into this, that staff has put into bringing this forward thus far. And I look forward to this continuing to move forward, hopefully tonight. All that being said, I do have some concern regarding the tax at 10%. I know that it's up to 10%. And as has already been mentioned earlier this evening, the industry is really already under pretty heavy burdens when you start adding up all the different taxes at all the different stages of the process for a product that comes to the retail or delivery stage. And even though there is, solid revenue numbers that are generated out of this industry, when you combine all those taxes with the inability to be able to take deductions like a normal business, those margins are much, much slimmer than people realize, and is one of the reasons why majority of the industry is actually, they're not turning a profit for the majority of the industry. And I think that setting, this too high will, limit the interest from more responsible operators, because what I think that could result in is, as has already been mentioned, a lot of neighboring cities around you have already, allowed cannabis businesses there, and they're being regulated and taxed at lower rates. And I think that it could really limit the interest that you might have from other, responsible operators. And I think this could result in having inexperienced operators that don't exactly understand the margins, and just can't necessarily meet the expectations that perhaps the city will have, as those are some pretty lofty numbers to be generated by the city. And I think that there needs to be some consideration as this goes in for the scoring process, and to decide what is truly important for the community, and to craft a process that will produce that for what the council is looking for the city. The last thing I think that any community wants to end up with, or any ruling body wants to end up with at the end of one of these processes, are businesses that are struggling to get open, or to stay in business, or to turn a profit, because that just allows the illicit market to continue to thrive and be strong. So while I am encouraged that this is moving forward, hopefully tonight, I do encourage the council to consider setting more competitive rates There are just a lot of other cities throughout the state that have started off high, and the industry has evolved a lot, and a lot of those cities are starting to reevaluate and lower those rates down more in the neighborhood of 4 to 6%. And I think that could get you into a competitive rate with your neighboring jurisdictions there. I thank you so much for the opportunity and look forward to the rest of the discussion this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. So I don't see any other speakers. So we will now close the public hearing and bring this matter back to the city council. So I'd like to do is at least do the first round of questions, and we'll keep our comments after questions, and I'll lead off with the questions to the city manager. And I think I'll just start off with the 10% that was discussed by the previous speakers. And I believe, Ed, that's up to 10%. The actual amount will be established by the city council at a future date through an adoption of the ordinance, if I'm correct. And I believe the city council has the opportunity to be flexible. So maybe at one point we adopt, let's say we decide to go with 6%, and then we decide to lower to 4% later on, and then we decide to increase to 9%. We'll have all this flexibility, if I'm correct.
Yes,
But
that
we
is
cannot-
correct.
But we cannot go above 10%. If we decide we want to tax 11%, then we have to go back to the voters and ask the voters to approve a maximum 11%.
Yes.
Is that the way it works?
Yes, that is correct. And most cities that do pass the tax typically put it at 10%. Some have actually exceeded that. Very few actually go below 10% as their maximum. The implementation is another matter. If you'll recall, back when we presented the ordinances for discussion during the workshops, we had always talked about a 5% tax rate, so that would probably be our likely recommendation, maybe even lower, in order to allow the businesses an opportunity to succeed. We certainly understand the perspective of the commentators regarding the 10% tax. We would never recommend to the city council that that be your starting point. It would always have been our intention to bring you something significantly lower than that. But providing you the flexibility, particularly when there are times when the industry is thriving based on the projections of the state of California, that once everything becomes synchronized, the industry in California was expected to be the leader of the world as it relates to cannabis production and sales. And should that ever occur, then certainly there would be a desire, I would think, to require that the business share some of that wealth with the community that is supporting it. So keeping that flexibility in your pocket, I think, is important, but again, emphasizing that it was never our intent to recommend that you would start off anywhere near that.
Okay. My next question, I have 6 more after this. My next question is, originally you started with a franchise fee, and now you're going with this tax, proposed tax. What's, well, one is, what is the difference between the two? And is the franchise fee no longer valid? That's my second question. Maybe that's the 2 questions I have.
Well, the franchise fee is a unique approach that the city of Montclair had decided to take because we considered that the regulatory environment for cannabis was equivalent to, for say, the regulatory requirements related to solid waste hauling.
Right.
Solid waste hauling is not a utility. Cannabis is not a utility. But they both require a significant amount of regulation. And in that way, we looked at the franchise fee as a means to oppose a revenue-raising measure on the business as opposed to a tax. And the reason for the franchise fee is that the franchise fee is not paid by the customer. It's paid by the business. The business can pass the franchise fee on in costs to the product when they feel that they need to. So for example, if they feel that they need to generate more revenue, they pass the franchise fee on at their will. If they're doing quite well and they want to attract more business from surrounding businesses, they can eliminate the franchise fee, absorb it out of their own pocket, and charge a lower price to the customer. The tax is different. The tax is mandated. You have to charge it, and the customer has to pay it. The tax is an issue that has to be approved by the voters. A franchise fee is not. The courts have determined that a franchise fee is not regulated in the same way that a tax is, and that it can be decided by the local agency whether or not they're going to do a franchise fee. Now, we weren't looking at a franchise fee in the way that most people think of it as a utility-related issue. We were looking at from the perspective of the franchise business tax or fee that the state of California allows for franchise-related businesses. So in a sense, the council would have been franchising the cannabis businesses. Instead of issuing them a license, you would issue them a franchise to operate, and they would have to pay that fee based on that franchise fee that the council, again, like this, you could adjust by resolution as you determine is necessary. 2%, 1%, 3%, 5%. There would be no limit on it because the council has total discretion on the fee. So for example, for solid waste, there's a 10% franchise fee for a solid waste hauler to operate in almost every city in the state of California. The standard franchise fee is 10%. And again, as it relates to this, we would not be recommending a 10% franchise fee, just like we would not be recommending a 10% tax. The difference with the tax is that the voters have to tell you what your range is, and the franchise fee, the council has total discretion.
So the franchise fee is still an option? Well, I know there's, well,
It would be my recommendation that the ordinance that comes forward to the council would include it as a secondary means, and in fact, maybe even give the business an option of the tax, unless the city attorney tells us, well, once you apply it to a business, all of them have to pay it. If that's the
Right.
case,
Okay.
then the franchise fee wouldn't be available to that particular category of business. But if, let's say the council issued 5 retail licenses, and every one of those businesses were agreeable to the franchise concept as opposed to the tax concept, and they entered into agreements with the city, then all of them would pay a franchise fee as opposed to the tax, because the council can decide to impose the tax or not impose the tax, as commentators have made note of, and as I have indicated earlier in the presentation. That's up to you.
okay, and obviously you're indicating there's still a lot of work involved for us to go through this ordinance if the voters, if this is on the ballot and the voters give us the green light. I don't know if you know the question is answered. City of Fontana recently passed an ordinance, I think 3 or 4 locations in Fontana for the sale of cannabis. And that is not going to the voters. The council decided to do it without voter approval. What type, do you know what type of fee they're using there? Or what are they, I mean, any idea, Ed? I'm
Well-
not putting you on the spot.
Yeah, so you are. And we're still developing our intelligence on what is going on in Fontana, and I think at this point in time, it's best that we reserve
All right,
comment.
I'm gonna move on then. I don't wanna piss off the mayor of Fontana. So if the city council, I think he already answered this question, but the city council, if the voters approve the tax measure, the would approve the, you know, the other measure, but the city council decides to do nothing, we're not gonna adopt the ordinance, it is not binding on the city of Montclair through the voter approval. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, the last part of that was what?
It's not binding on the city of Montclair to adopt, for the city council to adopt an ordinance to move forward.
No, it's an advisory measure. You can choose to adopt the ordinance or choose not to,
Okay,
whichever way you decide to go.
okay. Regarding the ordinance itself, and I know we're talking about something that's not on the agenda today, I know we've been, this ordinance has been around for a good 5, 6 years, a draft of it, and it's been modified as we've gone ahead. I mean, if we adopt this tax, this license tax, is there a lot of work that needs to be done to the ordinance still? Is there a lot of redrafting needs to be done?
It needs
I
to be
know.
updated.
Updated, also updated because of if this license tax, we were to move forward with it, and also there's new state laws coming down at the same time.
Yes, both.
And, you know, I know this is a general fund tax, but somebody asked me, can we have community benefits? So we set aside a percentage of the cannabis tax for the community, to benefit the community. We cannot do that, obviously, through an ordinance or through the voters, or else that becomes a special tax, special revenue tax. Am I correct?
Yes, so the money goes into the general fund and it's used for
Right.
general government purposes. However, the ordinance itself requires that any business that receive a license from the city contribute to community benefit purposes, contribute towards anti-drug programs, contribute to youth programs.
Right.
Contribute to a legal defense fund so that if the city is sued by a vendor, the cannabis businesses themselves pay for the city's defense. It doesn't come out of the city's money. These are the unique things about the ordinance that we prepared. These aren't found in other ordinances. These are unique because the council, when we entered into this process, said you wanted a well-regulated program, and we provided you that.
And the city council also, city council already does this, city of Montclair does this. We have out of our general fund, we have community funds that annually are contributed through the Community Activities Commission's recommendations. And so we could, as city council, add additional general fund money if we wanted to that program, and maybe better define what that program is for the future if we wanted to. So that is an option if the cannabis is generating money for this to the general fund. And then as far as the two measures, so the first measure is show the Montclair City Council consider and approve ordinance legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis business in the city of Montclair, which is a yes or no. That requires 3 votes of the city council to place on the ballot tonight.
The advisory opinion requires 3 votes, or advisory measure
And then
requires
the
3 votes.
second one, which is the tax measure, I won't read it, but that requires 4 votes. And the deadline to place these on the ballot is next week, sometime next week,
August 12th,
August 12th, which is a Friday. Okay, that's the deadline.
to turn them into the Register of Voters.
Okay, August 12th. Okay, so I think that's it. And then who wants to start next with questions? No one's lit up anybody have any questions? Anybody have questions to my left? Anybody, am I right? Anybody questions? Questions?
Formality question.
Okay, go ahead. Councilmember Lopez.
You stated the deadline to submit to the Registrar of Voters a certified resolution is the 12th, correct?
Correct.
Our next council meeting is scheduled for August 15th for a second reading, correct?
Yes, for the ordinance, not the resolution. The resolution is the measure that goes to the Register of Voters.
Is the request from the city clerk to council for a potential special meeting between now and the 11th, 12th of August, is that for purposes of taking up issues regarding this issue?
Well, we don't believe that that special meeting is necessary any longer.
And why is that?
Well, because we thought that we were going to have to pull the item tonight to make some final adjustments, but we were able to achieve that during the course of the day.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, as far as logistics and a matter of procedure, I don't have any other questions on
Okay.
that. I have some on the details and whatnot of the overall aspect of the issue before us, but not particulars.
Okay, so if there's no questions from the council, then I'll go ahead and start in comments then, and again, if you want to speak, go ahead and,
Mr. Mayor, I do have some questions.
oh, go ahead. Is the speaker work,
Yes.
is it working? Mine's not.
I
Mine's
don't
not
know. It
letting
says your
that
mic
through.
is
Okay.
live. It keeps
All
flashing
right, I don't
at me.
think mine's working then today.
Before I get into some other issues on this, I would like to see, before we do any of this, that we have an ordinance in place so we know what we're doing. One of the comments I consistently hear from elected officials and the public is that, gee, they passed something, but they didn't know what they passed. Now they're trying to put it together. I think we should have an ordinance in place. So if somebody says to me, oh, if we legalize this, what are the rules? What are the regulations? Gee, I don't know. We haven't decided on that yet. It's putting the cart before the horse. I want a really good ordinance. I do appreciate Mr. Ramos when he was here the last meeting explaining about an ordinance in the city of Pomona. That ordinance, if I'm correct, is 28 pages versus 300. It requires in that ordinance, and this was not done as a special tax. Our tax measure that we're before us tonight reads more like a special tax. It tells us all these things we're going to spend it on. It requires 30% of the people hired to work at the stores must be Pomona residents. If you're going to do this, isn't that a good idea? It requires 1% of the gross receipts to go to local nonprofits, youth and family programs. So the gross receipts from those businesses. It requires drivers to be bonded. The drivers are carrying a tremendous amount of cash. Makes them ripe for crime, doesn't it? They have to be bonded. It requires that the cars used by the drivers be inspected for roadworthiness. One does not want a driver breaking down and while waiting for assistance, being robbed. Can you imagine anywhere? It could be right on one of these streets, somebody orders it, the driver goes in, the car's broken, as they're waiting, the driver is robbed. It requires that workers actually be paid in an accountable form, a check or electronic transfer into a bank. Not in cash and not in product. We need a good ordinance. If they're paid in product, they become a target on the street. Is that what we want? Yes, I agree. We should ask the voters if it should be legalized. I don't know why we have to put in medical and everything else. It should be just a simple question. It should be very simple, such as, shall the city of Montclair legalize the sale of marijuana? Keep it very simple. But again, how do I support something when I don't know what the ordinance will be? We're asking for an advisory measure on a tax. How do you tax something that is illegal? Seems a little bit backwards. I'm going to ask a question. In November this year, there will be a proposition, perhaps two, asking about making gaming, I'll use their term, gaming, legal in California. It's already legal on tribal lands. We know that. I'm going to ask if it would be legal in California. Let's just say it passes with the same percentage that Prop 64 passed. Does that mean we're going to go out and allow casinos in the city? If we were, we would ask the voters, I'm sure, do you wish casino gambling to be legal? And we would have an ordinance in place because they would come to us and say, what about this, this, or this? I think we need to really put forward an ordinance first that we can vote on here, show the voters we're serious. This is an ordinance that will regulate all of this. Now we have an ordinance in place. It's voted on by the council on what we're going to do if you decide to legalize it and if you decide to pass a tax. My concern is also, when would this, if it's legalized, when would it go into effect? If the voters say, yes, we want this, what date does it go in effect? Does anybody have an answer?
Goes into effect when the city council puts into effect based on the voters' direction.
So the voters vote on this. And they don't know when it goes into effect. It's when we decide it goes into effect. So let's just say it passes. Voters say yes. 3 months later, we're told, perhaps by staff or others, that we have a long list of people who want to apply to get this in the city. We better hurry up and get this done because we're losing money. So let's go ahead and approve it, and let's get this ordinance in that we have been flailing around for the last several years. And we'll do it on an urgency ordinance because we need it that badly. That's my concern. I'm being asked to put something on a ballot that doesn't have any ordinance to back it up. We don't do that for other things in the city. If we were starting over as a city, I don't think we would say, oh, it's legal to build a home in the city, go ahead. And you know, we'll do the building permits and all the codes later on. As far as drivers in the city, yes, I know there's delivery drivers in the city. The argument is we're not collecting the tax. Well, we have mobile mechanics in the city too, don't we? I know people who use them. They go door to door, they fix your car. We're not getting the tax from that, are we? I'm struggling with this because I really like what Mr. Ramos said about the ordinance in Pomona. That's going to protect our residents. It protects workers. It protects the business owners. I can't vote for something where there's nothing to back it up. Additionally, he said 80% are still operating illegally because that tax was too high. I don't know what the right level is. He's more of an expert at it than I am. But I think 10% seems a bit high. Again, the ordinance in the neighboring city really distills it down. And I'd prefer we have an ordinance in place and say to the voters, a very simple question. Let's not throw in all the other stuff. Should the sale of marijuana be legalized in the city of Montclair? If they vote yes, we can say yes, good, we've got an ordinance ready to go. But we're going to perhaps have voters legalize something where there's no ordinance in place, there's no rules in place. They're going to ask us, what are the rules for this? Oh, I don't know. You wouldn't drive a car in a place without that. You have rules of the road that have been in place. When you get on the road, you know what those rules are. And, you know, I'm struggling with all of this being rushed to us. And yes, somebody will say, we've been doing this for years. But now we're putting it on the ballot, or voting to put it on the ballot. Maybe this should have been done a while back. And also, I've just been given this tonight, some of the changes in here. When I had this dais, how do I absorb these changes? This wasn't sent to us earlier. This was on the dais. I'd have to read something tonight and make a decision when normally we have a little more time to read things. So that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I have some things to say too, but maybe I'll go backwards. You know, the ordinance is a difficult document because this whole cannabis thing continues to change, especially if you go back to 8 years ago when we first just started the discussion. And when I say change, it's changing in terms of the laws coming out of Sacramento, but it's also changing in terms of the markets. And it's also changing in terms of who are the providers out there. It's also changed because, as one resident talked about, is you have this mobile delivery occurring. So, you know, when we work on an ordinance, we have to make sure it's a very good ordinance in Montclair. One of the advantages we've had is we didn't start 8 years ago like some other cities did, and I won't mention any names. I think Mayor Fontana made a comment that we learned the mistakes from other cities, so we're able to now have a better ordinance in place of us. So yes, I would agree with the argument is maybe it's better to put it in front of the voters like we have an ordinance here, and now the voters can vote on it, and then, you know, you can see what the ordinance is. But I'll put a two-prong there. One is, this is complicated, so we need to get together and go through all the complications and to understand that we have a good product for Montclair. But the second thing is, I'll make this argument, is that we are the stewards of Montclair. The voters of Montclair voted us in office, and of course there is an election in November, possibility, there are 3 of us will be on the ballot in November. Well, all 3 of us will be on the ballot in November. And, the voters in Montclair are going to see this ballot measure and are going to say that, okay, I'll make a position on the cannabis 2 measures, but I'm also going to vote for these council members. I trust that they are going to make the right decision when it comes to adoption ordinance. And maybe what happens is that we don't adopt an ordinance because we'll determine that this is not going to work for Montclair at the end of the day. Again, we're the stewards of the city. We're the ones who are going to have all the information. We're all the ones who are going to challenge staff. And then at the end of the day, the council may say, this is a bad idea, even though the voters of Montclair said that they said, yes, go ahead and move forward. So my argument is that, yeah, we don't have an ordinance, but we have a lot of work to do if the voters decide that they want this. So I think, in my opinion, since we're the stewards of the city, I think the voters want us, if they approve this in November, if we put on the ballot and they approve in November, they want us to make the hard decision to go through this and make not the hard decision, just the hard one, but also to make the right decision. So I will counter that argument. I'm not here to disagree with you. I understand where you're coming from. What I want to say this, the ordinance you saw that we have in the books now in Montclair, I was one of the persons that pushed for that over 10 years ago when the initiatives were passed by the voters and each city had to make a decision to allow or prohibit it. And I was one that pushed it at that time as the city council put it on the dais for approval. We did that. And I mentioned 8 years ago, we began to have discussions about, do we regulate cannabis use here in sales in the city of Montclair? And at that time, I wasn't very, very excited about it. I don't use cannabis. I don't like cannabis. I can't stand the smell of cannabis, I'll be honest with you. I'm a wine drinker, so if I have a stressful day, I'll just drink a glass of wine. But cannabis, I don't like the stuff, never do like the stuff. And of course, the city council, we've had several workshops on this issue, and I've actually gone through the 300 pages, and it's in my office right now. It's collecting dust, but if we get to that point, I'll pull it out unless there's, and of course, city manager said there'll be a bunch of changes anyways to update. What I thought about was at the time was if I was going to support this, one, obviously what areas of Montclair this would be allowed. 2, I wanted to see this as an economic opportunity for the city of Montclair, not just create jobs, but also uplift the economics of those areas, improve the buildings, for example. I did not want to see see very little or no impacts to neighbors as far as having a cannabis site there. Obviously, want to make sure it's crime safe. And then, of course, revenue for the city of Montclair. Those are my motivations if I was going to support something like this. 2 years ago, since we had a lot of free time during the pandemic, I actually went out and did some research and looked at some of the cannabis places and actually walked in by accident in one of them in Palm Springs. But, Coachella Valley, Moreno Valley, Orange County, I know Los Angeles County was also mentioned, but there has been an expansion of legalized cannabis by cities. And one of the things I noticed is that a lot of the operations are very professional. The ones are legal. They put a lot of money in their buildings. They put a lot of buildings on the exterior, interior of the buildings. In fact, I was in Palm Springs with my sister-in-law, and I had to use the bathroom, and there was a coffee shop on the outside because there was no cannabis in the coffee, but I had to use the building. It was a cannabis facility. So you had to go inside. So I went inside, and it's like, wow, this place is really, really nice, and this is the top operation, And so that's my thinking. If we were to do something like this in Montclair, it has to be something like that. Very nice, very professional, crime-free. Obviously, generate some money for the city of Montclair. But that's what I'm looking for. Economic opportunities and all the good stuff. So, today, cannabis, not just the use, but the acceptance of it is much more prevalent than it was just 8 years ago. It's I think the survey here said 80% of the people in the survey, or 70% of the survey, said they were okay with cannabis. And, when I was growing up, it was probably the difference. It was 70% against and 30% were all the teenagers and young people using the cannabis back then that accepted it. But that's changed. And so it has become much more prevalent. If you get over, if you have cannabis now or marijuana cigarettes, you don't get arrested anymore. They don't charge you crimes unless you got a big bag and you're selling it, and it's not compliance. Unlike the good old days. So it's kind of treated. If you have a glass of wine and you got a cannabis cigarette next to it, a police officer shows up, he's going to say, "Have a good day. Don't drink or smoke and drive." Right, Chief? That's what they say today. So it's become very prevalent among the public. In fact, there's now cannabis festivals going on. There's facilities that have cannabis, and parties, and everybody's professional. These are professionals now. They show up and they have, just like going to a wine club, a wine party, the same thing. So, I'm not ready tonight to say let's get this going. Let's adopt the ordinance. I understand all that. I think tonight what I'd like to say is this. Let's let the voters of Montclair decide if cannabis should be legal here in Montclair or not, or regulated and legal in Montclair or not. So we originally had one item on the agenda, one question on the agenda. That was for the tax. And over the weekend, I talked to the city manager and I said, hey, maybe we should, if we want the voters to understand this, let's make sure they understand what the true question is. And I don't want someone saying that he had a trick question and we didn't quite understand that was to legalize cannabis. So I think tonight, let's put it on the ballot in November. We have the two questions. One requires 3 votes. The second one requires 4 votes. If the voters say yes, then we have a lot of work to do. And it may not be me here, in November. And maybe we may have some new bodies here, and they'll be responsible to put this together. That's the other thing. If the voters want to decide who they're yes and no on the cannabis, they may want to decide who they want on city council to work on this. And if the voters say no, I'm done. I'm moving on. We have other things to worry about, but I'm done. So I'll start with Councilmember Denise Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of quick comments. I think I've always thought that it was our job to do what the voters said. If you look at our organizational chart, the residents are on the top. We're supposed to do what they said. They've already told us, yes, this is what they want. And now some years have passed, and the studies say that they still say, yes, this is what we want. And we can either make a decision now, and the decision is whether or not we receive tax revenue from cannabis businesses. We can either do that now, or we can wait until the August 12th date passes, and then we'll be waiting another 2 years to do what the residents have already told us that they wanted us to do. So, yes, we need to let the voters decide. They decided once, let's let them decide again. And if they decide, I don't believe that they, if from the election day, I don't think it goes into effect, they can open up the next day. The process has to be fleshed out. We have to know what all the rules are, and all of that has to still be done. But it doesn't make sense to me to do all the work of fleshing out the details if we're not even going to go there. That doesn't make sense. If we're going to go, okay, that's time to get through all the details and say what's what. And if we need to, we can certainly do that well before the absentee ballots go out, and we can have meetings to discuss it, to make sure the public understands what all the rules are. But it just doesn't make sense to me to not do it. I just doesn't make sense to me. We need the revenue. The revenue will support the residents, and the residents have already said yes. So if they said yes, then I say yes, because my job is to do what the residents say. That concludes my comments.
Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, regarding the certification question, it is on page 20 in our agenda. I'll read, at least this is the draft of the ordinance that we were given in our agenda before it was so quickly changed on us. The effective date, quote, "This ordinance shall take effect under Elections Code sections 9217 and 9122, 10 days after certification of its approval by a majority of those voting on the measure at the November 8th, 2022 general municipal election." Next section, section 6, certification. Upon approval by the voters, the city clerk shall certify say that 5 times fast, to the passage and adoption of this ordinance and shall cause it to be published according to law. Now, certification of elections takes 30 days, so that would push us into December of 2022, should it pass. Real quick question. Is there anything in law that prevents us from holding a special election on this issue in 2023?
No. Your special election on which thing?
On either of these questions?
Okay, well, for clarity, one is an advisory opinion. It's only telling you that, yeah, if you guys want to adopt a ordinance that legalizes cannabis, we're okay with that. Proceed at your own pace as it relates to the adoption of the ordinances. There's no timeline in which you have to respond to the residents as far as implementation of the ordinances. The tax measure, the other measure that goes before the voters, says that if you decide to legalize, then this is the maximum tax that you can charge. You decide what that tax rate is going to be. If you don't legalize it, then the tax stays on the books, but you're not going to charge anybody because you didn't legalize cannabis in the city. So a special meeting,
Special election.
a special election in 2023, no. You cannot have a special election on a tax measure except at a general election in which, for a community in which other members of the city council are running.
Okay.
But you could on legalization.
Well, I think the law now is that you can only have a special election when there is a regularly scheduled election that you would vote on. I don't know that you can set aside a special election for something like this. City Attorney may be correcting me on that if I'm incorrect, but I don't think that you can just hold a special election for a single item like this.
Okay.
I would question, personally, I'm not an attorney, I'd question that. I see ballot measures in other cities all the time that are in an off-year election for a specific item, so.
Yes, those would be related typically to putting somebody on the council if you call for a special election if there's a vacancy. But on measures related to taxes, you cannot do that except for a special election.
Excuse me, Councilman Lopez.
No, go ahead.
I don't think we're talking about the tax measure. We're talking about the issue of legalization. I think somebody could put that on the measure on a ballot in an off-year election for a special election.
Let's have Diane, State Attorney Robbins, answer that question.
The one item is simply an advisory. It's a recommendation to the council. That could be on any election, but the tax itself has to be on a general election. So the ordinance that is in your agenda packet is identical to the one that's been set out on the dais, except for one part. And that was to add that the initial tax would be at $0 until the council decides to move forward with taxing cannabis businesses. But the only time we would be able to have this particular item asking the voters whether they are in agreement with the tax is at a general election. So if we don't do it, adopt a resolution providing for that ordinance by August 12th, we have to wait 2 years for that.
What about the legalization issue? That could be in a special election. We have a separate issue on a legalization.
I don't know, but it's an advisory opinion that we are asking the voters for.
No, advisory opinion on the tax. I'm talking about the measure that we're looking to put forward, asking whether or not marijuana should be legalized in the city of Montclair. That's not an advisory.
Well, the advisory measure is, do the voters want the council to move in that direction? And then that's up to the council to decide what to do based upon that. The ability to enact the tax has to be okayed by the voters.
So, so we could take the measure about the legalization, we could do it in a special election.
Yes, we can.
Okay. That
Answer your
makes a
question
lot
as
of
you
sense
can.
to me because I could then support something because we could work to get a good ordinance in place. And that might be a
Yes.
very good opportunity. Let's work to get a good ordinance in place, talk to the public what they might like. What's going on in Pomona is a good ordinance, and put this on for a special election next year.
That is an option, yes.
You cannot put any fundraising,
No, not
I-
the tax, the legalization.
The policy.
Advisory,
The,
advisory measure.
should it or should it not be legal in the city of Montclair could be done next year in a special election. That would give this body the opportunity to work on a good ordinance. So next year, if a member of the public says to me, gee, if I legalize marijuana in this city, what is the ordinance in place? What's going to be going on? At least we will have something to tell them. So there is no rush to do this immediately. We could do this as far as the legalization question next year. I think that's a better way to go. Then we have an ordinance in place. I have
Okay,
something
all
I
right,
can
let's
take to
do
show
this.
people.
Councilmember Lopez, do you have more questions or comments?
I do. I don't mind the back and forth. Actually, it's kind of contributing to some of my questions that I was going to raise, but I will reclaim my time, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. You know, you stated, Mr. Mayor, that we will have all the information as council members that we can then share with the public, challenge staff or whatnot. I'm actually surprised when I got my agenda packet that I did not even get a copy of the old in-progress ordinance, even if it is 300 pages long, for something to review. I did not get these changes, like all of us, until we sat here at the dais and literally was told about it 2-3 minutes before the meeting started that there was a change. So I share my sentiments with my colleague, Mr. Rue, on proceeding, a little bit of hesitation. I would like the ordinance, even though we have the quote-unquote flexibility to start at 10 or start at 5, change it here and there. What the city of Long Beach has done, they have a 6% tax on medical or some type of not the actual sale of it. I think it's a loophole that they use to tax a 6% medical form or medical aid or assistance related to marijuana, 8% on retail. And there is a push there to have their tax reduced, and because their council has the flexibility to do so. But in doing so, what they are doing now is, I just read the article, I was up here while you guys were discussing, there are delay tactics being used by their city staff saying that we have to take into account the fiscal impacts of the reduction. We have to do a survey. We have to get basically the equivalent to doing an environmental impact report, but only on the financial aspects of decreasing the tax, how it'll hurt the city, what services will be cut. And I'm afraid if we did that in Montclair and wanted to decrease it, that's what we're going to be hit with by staff and the city manager, that we're going to need to do a study first before we can proceed. So I don't buy the argument or the storyline that it's going to be so easy for us as a council or future council to reduce it, increase it, or whatnot. And my questions then would be raised at that. At what time can we as a council do so? Or do we have to wait on a recommendation to do so by the city manager, whoever he or she may be in the future, by future councils? So I'm uneasy about that. I would like to see, if anything goes to the voters, that it not be 10%. I want to see 5%, but I would be willing to compromise and go to 7%. And that would be our cap and our ceiling. And then from there, we can reduce it. Pomona has a 5% tax. And in their 5% tax they only have 2 operating marijuana dispensaries, or businesses, I should say. They get $3 to $4 million, and that's off of 2 establishments. It is true, 80% of the industry is still illegal, so it's going to take some time to tamper that down. Long Beach has a 6 to 7% tax. San Francisco, because their tax is so high, it's their residents that pressured their elected officials to put a pause on the tax. And what are they doing? They're going to do a study to look at the fiscal impacts of that tax and how it's going to hurt them. What Pomona allows, and I think that should be our base ordinance, is Pomona's. They allow 8 total licenses, 2 retail, which they have currently. They have 2 brewery businesses that just got new apps and approved. They have 2 non-retail, and I forgot what the other 2 were. But they had 20 applications competing for the 2 retail spots. And when that happened, they started competing against each other and offering incentives amongst themselves as to what they were going to contribute back to the city. Now, in their ordinance, they have it in their ordinance, so it's local law, that 1% of gross receipts by the operators has to be given to nonprofits that either have are domiciled in the city and function, or a nonprofit whose residents benefit the most are Montclair residents, or a significant Montclair impact is, or function of their nonprofit is the base of their business. We can do that. In order to proceed, I want that guaranteed, because I am tired of having groups basically grovel to the committee or the board begging for CDBG funds, or community block grant funds rather, to get their funding, like the Community Development Center or the Montclair Women's Club or whatever the case might be. If we do this with the stipulation that we're going to require 1% of gross receipts going to nonprofits, you could have all those groups continually taken care of. Montclair Little League, the churches in town, Our Lady of Lourdes wouldn't be struggling to have their carnival anymore. They'd be able to have it. That's what we should be doing. Steezy, I believe it was in Pomona, they entered into an agreement with Chaffey College to have their education programs paid for by members of their staff or those that they agree to hire to utilize that school, and they get that education, the advancement in education paid for. That's a good thing. We should be doing that. We should make that as part of the offset to them wanting to do business in here and us taxing the entities. One of the other businesses in Pomona, Catalyst, has a 50% local hire requirement that they imposed on themselves, that they would hire Pomona residents to do their business, or to be employees of their business. If the polling suggests that 60 to 70% of Montclair voters are already either strongly in favor or likely to adopt this, then it begs the question, why not go to a 2/3 requirement to adopt an ordinance where these would be designated to go to guaranteed spots? If we're so confident it's going to pass, then let's put it for a designated spot to secure some of the funding for the very items that are listed in question 1, mainly police and fire services. So that way they're locked in, it's guaranteed, and I bet you anything, majority of residents would even vote for that, knowing that it's going to a designated purpose. If the floor is already at 60, 70%, I would predict that if we did that, we would have even a higher turnout. I am not at all opposed to marijuana businesses, establishments in the city. I am not. I once was, maybe 10, 15 years ago, but I am no longer. I just want to do it right. And I guess that's a give and take and a matter of compromise. If we're going to do this, then I'd like those stipulations. I want the tax cap lowered, and I want a stipulation that at least 1% of gross receipts by the business establishments go to nonprofits that benefit Montclair residents and/or the community in general. I would agree with the 2 folks that are in the industry that know it better, that does need to be reduced. Right now, I believe Claremont is looking at 5 or 7%, which is what we would do. But if the word is out there that we can go up to 10% at any given time, you can bet that we may lose interest for folks wanting to do business in Montclair, because they will just go next door to Pomona, Claremont, or even they'll travel to Fontana. And I think that is a losing proposition for us. I'd rather see as a compromise a 5 or 7% tax on this, as opposed to a potential up to provision of 10%. As an aside, speaking on the requirement that these folks give money to organizations, and Mark Ramos touched on this, Steezy in Pomona, which is one of the 2 that operate just on their 1% gross receipts, Like he said, for 8 months, they wrote, of their gross receipts for 8 months, it was $207,000. Kennedy Park in Pomona is now the recipient of half of that, and the other half goes to iPoly, which benefits education in Pomona. Our Montclair College to Career program under Marsh's department could benefit greatly from that and would have a steady stream of income if we would just make that stipulation in the proposition, so that way it would help with its passage even more so. I don't mean to be rambling, but I just think we can do this a little bit more fine-tuned and proceed a little bit more cautiously. That's my reservation right now. You guys had me just with the agenda item, but with some of these changes and whatnot, I don't know. I now have a bad taste in my mouth about it, but I just want assurances that at least maybe two of my colleagues will, since this is the place to negotiate and come up with compromise here in the open while it's agendized, let's negotiate and bring that 10% down now. And let's put a stipulation that 1% of gross receipts go back to legitimate Montclair programs, nonprofits in the city.
Councilmember Rue, Mayor Pro Tem Rue.
Yes, I agree with much of what Councilmember Lopez said. I'll go back to my question a little bit ago. Our attorney isn't here at the moment, but there is no rush to do this right now. We can do this, put it on the ballot next year as far as the legalization issue. That gives us time to write a good ordinance. We don't even need to put all of that other on the ballot. What we can do is ask them next year about legalization, then have the ordinance already written and ready to go. So if during the time they're considering voting, we have an ordinance we can show them. Yes, we have an ordinance ready to go. When you vote on this, once it's certified, whatever the timeline is, this ordinance will drop in place. The ordinance will do this, this, and this. We could simply copy what's being done in Pomona because it's a copy of a successful ordinance. 30% local hire, and none of that has to be put in the ballot measure. If you're just asking somebody to legalize it, the question is, shall marijuana be legalized in the city? Yes or no? If it's yes, boom, we have the ordinance ready to go when it's ready. We can do that next year. That gives us time to do this ordinance, to get something done that's right, and not rush something. I think that's the way to go. I would also concur, I think 10% is too high, but again, we can do an advisory thing next year, put that on the ballot. We have then the advisory vote on there, and I would do it at 6%. They're the experts, I'm not. But we're being asked to go to the voters and legalize something where there's no ordinance in place. There's nothing. I can't tell them, oh, what happens when we legalize it? Gee, well, we'll write an ordinance. And my concern, and I have this concern, is that when the voters say, if they say yes to legalize it, we're going to rush to get a 300-page ordinance in place because we want to. I want an ordinance that protects workers. That's what's good about Pomona. It protects the workers. They're not being paid in anything but I'll use an old term, the coin of the realm. In a lot of these establishments, they pay them in product. That isn't good. There was recently, and it's away from marijuana, a Chick-fil-A that wanted to pay people in chicken sandwiches. That's just wrong. You don't pay people in product, you pay them in the coin of the realm. And I think that's where we need to go. I think we need to look at doing this next year. We can do it. There's nothing illegal about it. This gives us time to really talk to the people about this. Hey, if we legalize it, this is the ordinance we're going to try to put in place. What do you think about it? And then when it is legalized, if it is legalized, we have an ordinance ready to go. I guarantee you that we wouldn't do this if it came to casino gambling, and I'm not in favor of casino gambling. But if that passes in November, I don't think we'll be trying to put that on a ballot. If we did, we'd be talking about the issues of crime and everything else.
Thank you.
Let's bring this down, and let's do this next year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. Delaying this issue when our residents have already decided that they're interested in having a say is it's really no different than telling them that we're not allowing them to vote. Even if we're putting it over for 2 years, we're telling them, you don't get a say for the next 2 years. And as far as the advisory request, it's asking, shall the Montclair City Council consider and approve ordinances legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis businesses in the city of Montclair? Shall we consider it? Either they want us to or they don't. I don't believe that they need to sit there and read an ordinance in order to make that decision. And if they read this advisory and they decide, I don't have enough information, I don't want to make a vote on this issue, then they've spoken. We've given them the opportunity to speak. If they don't have the information, they read this and they say, yeah, go forward, I trust you, I trust our elected officials, then we're giving them the opportunity to speak their piece. And furthermore, it's my understanding that the advisory measure is a protection for our city. And City Manager Starr, if you could clarify the purpose of putting that on with this measure, because I think there's a little bit of confusion.
The purpose of putting the advisory measure on?
Yes.
The purpose of putting the advisory measure on is to respond to the city council's past statements that they would like to see what the voters have to say about legalization. And this gives the voters an opportunity to weigh in that they either believe that the council should legalize cannabis or they should not legalize cannabis. And then the city council responds to whichever direction they choose to go based on that advisory. I do need to point out that it is the question of legalization that is the advisory opinion. The issue of the tax is not an advisory opinion. That's the voters simply voting on whether or not it should be a certain tax rate. If the council wants to lower it to 7%, staff has no objection to that. But I also want to point out that, as City Attorney Robbins also indicated, the ordinance itself says that the tax rate will be 0% until the city council decides what the tax rate will be. So if it's decided that staff brings you ordinances for you to consider, you will tell us at that point in time what the tax rate is going to be. There's not going to be any delay by staff, because if the purpose and the intent of bringing you the ordinances is for you to consider passing those ordinances, you will consider at the same time what that tax rate is going to be. If you decide that the tax rate is going to be 2%, 3%, up to 7%, if that's the limit that you want to take this to, that's your decision. The only time that staff would be involved in asking you to reconsider that would be in the future, if it was decided that the tax rate was too high or the tax rate was too low, and then that's when you would consider it. But at the very beginning of the process, the council has full authority and responsibility to decide what that tax rate will be, up to the maximum voter authorized rate, which is currently 10%. But if you decide that you want to change that to a number like 7%, then the maximum that it could be is 7%. But again, the council decides from the onset, not staff, what that will be, because that will simply be part of your approval of the ordinances that would provide for the licensing of cannabis. So we've prepared ordinances. They were presented in a series of workshops to the council. They were presented in a workshop to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission approved them. And I will tell you this, that once our ordinance was released to the community, the city of Montclair received so much favorable response from high-end cannabis businesses telling us that the ordinances that this city prepared were the best ordinances that any municipality had prepared, because it was quite clear that we put a lot of thought into them. The ordinance in Pomona, That's the standard HDL ordinance that HDL has promoted to all of the cities that have engaged with them, with some modifications that Pomona made in consultation with people like Mr. Ramos. City of Montclair met with Mr. Ramos. The City of Montclair incorporated Mr. Ramos's recommendations into the ordinance that we had prepared for the City Council. The city staff also incorporated requirements that businesses make donations. If you want to specify a certain amount of money that has to be allocated for that purpose, we can certainly do that as the ordinances continue to be developed. They already contain those provisions, but if you want modification to those provisions, we can do that. Again, the ordinance is comprehensive. That's why it's 300 pages long, is because it covered all of these issues in detail to make certain that we held each of the cannabis businesses responsible. As I pointed out earlier, this ordinance also has a legal defense fund. There is not another ordinance in the state of California for cannabis that requires the cannabis businesses to donate to a legal defense fund so that they are required to pay for the defense, not the city of Montclair. We've covered these bases. We've watched what other cities were doing. We've made certain that whatever the legal issues other cities were facing, that they would be not faced by this city council. So for example, when it comes to the selection, some cities went with lotteries. Other cities went with a merit-based system. Ours is a hybridized version of that. It incorporates both a lottery and it incorporates a merit-based system so that we are protected from legal challenges by saying that, oh, well, you did a lottery and that is prohibited by court cases. Or your merit system really took out, didn't give me full credit for what we are capable of doing. Our hybridized version incorporates both of those as well as a pre-evaluation to remove those applications that don't meet the minimum basic standards. There's an appeal right that these businesses get to appeal if they are in disagreement, but once the appeal process is through, and if they are still not a selected business for the other levels of consideration, then they're done with that. There's also a provision in there that says that if you are a business that operated illegal in the city of Montclair, you cannot submit an application for 3 years. Why does it say 3 years? Because courts have ruled that if a business operated illegally in your community and you prohibit them from ever submitting an application, your ordinance is invalid. And that's why we've taken the time to study all of these experiences that other cities have endured and incorporated them into our ordinances that we prepared to the City Council. I apologize that Councilmember Rue did not have Councilmember Lopez did not have an opportunity to review the ordinance in advance. But again, you're not being asked to adopt those ordinances right now. Those ordinances will be brought to you in the future for you to consider. I don't think that residents are asking to weigh in on the ordinances. That's your duty. Your responsibility is to pass the laws of the city. They're only asking for an opportunity, or at least the advisory opinion is giving them the opportunity to weigh in on just whether or not you should even consider legalization. From that point on, they're giving you the responsibility to decide how you're going to proceed and at which time we would be bringing you those ordinances for your consideration, for you to evaluate. You know, I can bring you the HDL ordinance that the city of Pomona and virtually 80% of the other cities in the state of California have adopted. It's a very simple, basic ordinance, which is why it's 26 pages long. There's not a lot of detail in it. But the other reason why we developed the ordinance that we did is because if the regulatory requirements aren't in our ordinance, then the default is the state of California. I've heard it before from members of the city council that why would we let the state of California tell us how we're to handle our local business? Right. So our ordinance defines what this council gets to do in relation to regulation of cannabis businesses that operate in the city. That's why it's 300 pages long, because it's detailed, because it gets into the nitty-gritty of regulation, and it allows this council to decide how that regulatory process moves forward. If you don't want that, and you want the state of California to have full say as to how the regulatory process works in the city of Montclair, then we can certainly bring you the HDL ordinance for you to consider. The majority of cities that have adopted it, have adopted legalized cannabis in their communities, did that very same thing. But as I said early on, when we entered this road, it was the direction from the city council that they wanted a well-defined ordinance that regulates the businesses, and that's what we tried to deliver to you. The only reason that it got delayed was because of the issue of revenue-related generation, and so the ordinances didn't proceed further after the Planning Commission took action to recommend approval, and we have continued to watch and monitor and look at the different aspects of what has been happening in the industry, and certainly to respond to the revenue-raising component of it. The speakers were correct that there is a desire and an intent to reduce taxation of cannabis to provide the businesses to flourish, and it would certainly be our intent to bring you a much smaller number than the 10%. Even if you recommended that it be 7%, we would be bringing in a recommendation for a smaller number than that initially. And then down the road, we would probably ask that you consider 5, 6, 7%, whatever that number may be, if we feel that the businesses have developed to the degree that they can sustain a higher tax rate. But that is the purpose of the range. We went with 10% because that is the recommended range by the professionals in the industry that look at the taxation issue, not with a recommendation that you come in that high, but that you simply give yourself the flexibility to go there. But if the council wants a lower number like 7%, staff is not opposed to that.
And just a couple more quick comments, thank you. So it's my understanding that the benefit of having the resolution along with the advisory measure is that it signals to Sacramento that we are still.
Yes, I failed to miss your point, and I did mention that earlier in my discussion, that you do need both of them to go hand in hand, because if you go with a tax measure, there is a signal that is sent to the state of California that Montclair is open for business. And the state will issue state licenses to applicants that apply. There is a lack of clarity in state law as to which comes first, the state license or the local license. Generally, the state will refer back to the local government to make an inquiry as to whether or not the state issued or the local government issued a local license. However, the state does not have to do that. They do not necessarily do that. And if a business can demonstrate that the city of Montclair has a tax measure on the books for cannabis, the state can make a presumption that the city is open for the state to issue them licenses to operate in the city of Montclair. The advisory measure has the voters saying whether or not they want you actually to legalize cannabis in the city of Montclair. That sends another signal to the state of California that the question on legalization has been put to the voters, and the voters are telling the city council, you make the decision on legalization, and the state will then know that they have to come back to the city to deal with whether or not the city has legalized it, in addition to already having taken action related to passing a tax. The issue of having the ordinances on the books now, you know, maybe that's a chicken or an egg argument. Should you have the ordinance first before you go to the voters? You could, but my memory may be incorrect on this, but it is my belief that the city of Pomona passed their tax measure before they passed their ordinance, because there was a lot of controversy in the city of Pomona as to where the businesses would go, how they would proceed, and what they were going to do. In fact, I will also tell you this. The city of Pomona came and consulted with the city of Montclair on how to proceed and wanted our ordinances as the basis for how they were going to operate. The city of Montclair's response was our ordinances were still under development, and therefore they were not a public document that we could release. So the city of Pomona hired HDL to provide the ordinance, just as, again, as many other cities did. And again, if I recall correctly, the city of Pomona adopted their tax measure first, then fleshed out where the businesses were going to be, how the regulation was going to proceed, and then adopted their ordinances regulating the business after the tax measures were already adopted.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I want to be clear, I think some of the suggestions by Councilmember Rue and Councilmember Lopez are fantastic. And I do think that we need to take into consideration some of those suggestions in the future. But for now, we need to allow the residents to vote. And I think that that's what this really boils down to. You know, and I would agree, if a higher tax rate is going to go to the consumer, then we should certainly consider a lower tax rate. If that is going to prevent the businesses from coming into our city and frustrating the purpose, then we should definitely consider a lower tax rate. I absolutely agree with that. I think that if we can guarantee that the revenue is going to help support our city and our safety in addressing homelessness, then that's fantastic. I don't think anyone on this council would disagree with that. It's just a matter of getting this out to the public, letting them take a vote. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I know I have some more people who want to speak, but I'm going to try to do some stuff here. I agree with my colleagues on my right that the cannabis funds, portion of it, and it technically would be general fund funds, but nevertheless, whatever calculation you come up with should go back into the community and to our nonprofits who, here in Montclair. And it'd be good if there was provision there. Obviously, if we have an ordinance in place, we could put those provisions in the ordinance or a resolution or however we can do it, that the city of Montclair will put this amount of money into the community based on some revenue projection and the percentage of that. And as far as the other aspect of it is employees and making sure that, well, one, employees are protected, but second of all, that, that the employees, residents here in Montclair, a percentage of them are hired to work for the cannabis industry in Montclair. And again, the ordinance is a good way to deal with that. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, I know Councilmember Lopez, you brought up two things. You brought up the 7%, first of all, in the gross receipts. Am I correct?
1% of gross receipts.
Up to 7% of gross receipts.
No. Up to 7% for the tax.
Right.
But 1% of gross receipts.
Yeah, up to 7% of the tax be charged.
Correct.
Now, the 1%, the problem with the 1%, it requires 2/3 vote. And I know you made an argument that, if the voters want this, we'll get 66% of the vote, which may or may not happen. And I have a problem with that there. It just designates 1%. There's other issues there too. It may be later on that the city council, we might have financial situations where we have to, we need money now to cover our cost, and now we're stuck into paying this as one example. Or we may modify what that percentage is. It's already set stone here, and we have to go back to the voters to modify it. So my deal with you is I don't have a problem with 7%. Can we make a motion here tonight and say is that we're going to direct staff to come back to the city council with some plan, if this ordinance is in front of us, the voters vote for this, that we are going to designate, and we want to know what the percentage is. We kind of talked about what it is today, that staff will bring something back to us. So this is something that the city council supports. City council wants to put more money back in the community through the general fund as a result of additional revenue coming from the cannabis. Are you comfortable with something like that?
As long as they do not have to go through the CDBG or community block grant process. I want it totally separate from
You
that.
have another process already in place? You remember what there's a, what's the name of that, those funds that we give back to the community, Ed?
Okay, so you can designate in the ordinance, I think your direction, if I understand it correctly, is you can designate in the ordinance that you want a specific amount of money, percentage, going to specific functions, and that would be through the Community Activities Commission. They administer a community benefits fund program where they give money to charitable organizations in the city. Montclair, our Human Services Director, Richter, can speak to that if she would like, but each year, as you know, the Community Activities Commission conducts hearings related to making donations to charitable organizations. If the council wants to commit larger sums of money for that purpose, that would be the route.
How much money do we put in there right now?
Right now, I believe it's what, 20,000 a year?
20,000 a year? Okay. I know this is not a budget item right now, but I'm willing right now to increase that tonight, and we can do that.
Well, it's not on the agenda. You
Okay,
can't.
then I'm willing to do this, is direct staff to bring it back to the next meeting, that we're going to increase those funds, the community funds, and at the same time, we're going to direct staff at the next meeting that they bring us a proposal in the future as we're considering this ordinance. The proposal is how we designate more money back in the community and outside of the CDBG, as you spoke of, but through the general fund, from revenue that comes from the cannabis. You understand, Ben? Councilman
I
Lopez?
do. I just have two questions regarding that as far as process. One, I don't think we can earmark, even if we agendize it for a special meeting, future meeting, earmark the amount, because we don't quite know yet what amount of those funds we're going to be able to get from potential businesses in the future.
Right.
And then two, I don't know if Mr. Ramos is still on the call, but he knows the process real well with respect to how Pomona set aside those funds and the requirements that they make the businesses go through to report to verify the receipt of the payment to a nonprofit, et cetera.
Right, and I believe I'm sorry, that will be in the ordinance. Am I correct, Ed?
Yeah, so if I may say, I understand Councilmember Lopez's comments, and I agree. The process, Mr. Mayor, you indicated that we should be bringing back an agenda item in the next meeting. I just don't think that that's feasible for staff to be able to do that, because we would have to research all of these things.
No. What I'm asking for, this is what I'm asking for, two things. I'm asking, one, that we revisit the community, the CAC funds, the 20,000, and I'd like to discuss at the next meeting about increasing that. The second thing I'm asking is, I just want to make a motion to give.
If I may for a
Go ahead.
second, though, first, Marcia, did you conduct your CAC hearings for the year already?
We did.
Yeah.
The budget had in the 20,000 that
Okay.
was just adopted.
So it's already been distributed for the year.
And we can do more,
If
right?
you want her to do more, my suggestion was we bring it back at mid-year, ask for more at
No,
mid-year,
let's do it
and then
sooner.
let her do a second round.
Let's do it sooner. Let's do it sooner, bring back to the council sooner. I'm trying to get Mr. Councilman Lopez on my side on this issue here.
Okay.
Second of all,
Well,
I
then the
want-
rest of it, I think it's best that we bring you back the recommendations based on our meetings with Mr. Ramos and others as to how it should be configured within the ordinance, and then you let it be decided through the ordinance adoption process.
Right, so what I'm saying is that I want to do is direct you tonight, city manager, that do you understand what the council wants? Well, at least possibly the three of us. I don't know, I can't speak for the other two councilors on this issue. I think we're all in agreement. But in the future, if this is adopted, we want something to come back from staff to set up this mechanism. Do you understand, Ed, I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. Again, I believe, already have these provisions in the ordinance, but we
Right.
will expound
I
on
want a
them.
motion tonight saying that to make Councilmember Lopez comfortable.
Well,
and the rest of
again,
the council
they're
comfortable.
already in the ordinance, but I hadn't seen the ordinance. That ordinance was brought up in 2019. I was not on the council. So if I'm going to rely on your word and what's in the ordinance, my answer is no right now.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that I will certainly modify the ordinance to make certain that it complies with even more stringent standards. And then when we bring you the ordinance, if they're not even stringent enough then for you, you modify it and tell us how to change the language.
But I'm being asked to vote, to possibly vote yes tonight as a measure of compromise, so that's my dilemma.
Well, I'm giving you the compromise. You asked for 7%. I'm agreeing to that. You're asking for the 1%. We can't do that tonight, in my opinion, but what I'm saying is, I'd like to make a motion directing the city manager that he understands that this is expected as we're working on the ordinance, and he'll give us a plan at that time.
Can you give me an indication of what you want to be allocated to the CAC for additional community benefits funding? So that when we bring back a agenda report related to that, that we address the council's monetary amount?
Well, Councilman Lopez, is there a dollar amount you like to direct?
Well, again, I think there's some confusion, because I'm fine if you want to increase the allocation to the CAC to go to nonprofit groups in the city, but I'm asking for something totally separate from that, because we're asking for potentially a separate tax on new businesses. And I'm asking of that tax generation, no, I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm asking for 1% of their gross receipts, like Pomona requires, then go to nonprofits or entities in Montclair. So it's separate from the CAC allocation, is what I'm asking for.
And I can build that into the ordinance when it comes to you. I can't get the money from them until you license it and they are operating legally in the city.
Mr. Mayor, I'm struggling with this. My concern earlier this evening was borne out. My concern is that if voters decide to legalize this, we're going to rush to get an ordinance set up.
Well, we're not rushing an
Let me
ordinance, Bill.
finish.
You
If
repeat
it's
that,
legalized-
excuse me, I still have the floor. I haven't given up the floor. You're going back to another issue. I am spending my time now with Councilman Lopez, working with Councilman Lopez. So I feel like making a motion, but I agree with the 7%. I have no problems with the 7%. But I'd like to see if we can include a motion where we direct the city manager that this 1% designate you're talking about, that this we brought back to the city council when we are considering the ordinance, that we are going to commit to this 1%, and the city manager is going to give us a policy at that time. That's what I'm trying to work on right now. So Councilman Lopez, how do you feel about that?
Separate from the CAC allocation process?
Separate from the CAC allocation. This is going to be general fund money. This is not CDBG funds. I'm also proposing that we come back at a meeting and increase those allocations right now, even before we have the election, you know? I'm open to some dollar amounts. Right now, we're giving out $20,000. How much do you want to give out? How much, I mean, we can't talk about it right now, but we'll put it on the agenda for discussion.
Well, I mean, if I had my way, ideally, I want a damn fire engine tomorrow before we dole out any
Well-
more money to CAC funds. I mean, because that's a greater priority.
Well, this is community funds I'm talking about.
The 7% I recommended, Mayor Pro Tem Rue suggested 6%, I believe. I think that actually is what Pomona recommends in looking back. I am curious to see what my colleague, Mr. Rue, would have to say about the compromise proposal by the mayor.
Okay, Mr. Rue. Mayor Pro Tem Rue?
Yes, just a moment. In regard to the tax issue, we're relying on something in the future. You're asking me to put something onto a ballot. Right now, it's 0. We can't change it tonight. You're asking me to have trust that it will be at something reasonable. I'm struggling with that. I'm struggling because this should have been worked out before it got to this point here. My concern is it's 0. We're relying that we will do this at 7% because staff will bring something back. I don't know if that will happen. What if they pass this and we decide, oh, it'll be something different? We can't commit to any amount tonight. without changing this ordinance.
Okay, so this is
Let
what
me-
I'm,
let me- let me-
well, you've
My
spoken.
ties into making sure we have a good ordinance. It's not just 1% gross receipts, 30% local hire. I think that's important to let voters know we'll have a 30% local hire. I think it's important to let voters know that drivers will be bonded, that workers are going to be protected. That's what the Pomona ordinance does. It at least protects workers. In our 300 pages, I didn't see anything in there that does that. So what we're doing is having to ask voters to approve something, and trust us, we'll write an ordinance later. We just heard how Pomona wrote the ordinance later, and there were some struggles with that. You know, I don't have guarantees that that's what's going, that, you know, it'll be at 7%. I don't have guarantees on any of this. And voters are going to ask us, oh, if we legalize this, what are the rules? Oh, trust us, we'll put them in place. That's what they did with the bullet train. And as far as voters have already had their say on this, I think a lot of voters voted for the bullet train. If they had their choice, they'd vote again, and it wouldn't be for it. So I'm struggling. I'm really, truly struggling on this.
Well, I understand your struggle.
I feel it's just been shoved at me the last minute. And you know, this should have been handled in a different way. There's no rush to get it on this ballot. Why is it so important to get an advisory vote on this ballot and not take it to a special election next year?
Okay, it's back to me again. So I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to start with this motion. I'm going to make a motion to, where is it now? Too many papers here. Where is it here? Okay, I want to make a motion to, where is my staff report? It's probably easier after this one. All right, let's see here. This is the submitting. Okay, I want to make a motion on the advisory first. This is for move for approval of resolution number 22-3375. This is regarding the advisory. The advisory states, shall the Montclair City Council consider and approve ordinances legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis business in the city of Montclair, have this placed on the November 2022 ballot. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
We have a second.
You said 223375. You mean 22999?
No,
No, which one is it? 22999, which
resolution number 22-3375. Am I correct on that one there?
74.
Just to clarify what I'm doing here?
That's the advisory opinion you're asking to
That's
vote
the
on.
tax
yes.
measure, correct?
No,
No.
Resolution 22-3375 is the advisory.
is the advisory.
And then again, it states, shall the Montclair City Council consider and approve ordinances legalizing and licensing medical and adult use cannabis business in the city of Montclair? Am I correct, City Attorney?
Yes.
Okay. I believe I have a second. Is that you? Are you? Do you
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I second.
Okay. Any comments on this motion?
Madam City Attorney, this requires a majority vote, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. If there's no comments, please, let's have electronic vote.
Against my better judgment.
Okay, that is adopted 5-0. I'm going to make a second motion. My second motion is to direct the city manager. And now, I made this incorrectly, so feel free to interrupt me, city attorney or city manager, if you don't understand what I'm doing. My motion to this is follows. The city council directs the city manager to bring back a policy in the event that the tax measure is adopted that will provide a methodology based on revenue that a cannabis tax creates to the city council for consideration as part of the consideration of the adoption of the ordinance on the cannabis. Does that make any sense to anybody?
Say it again, please.
I would
Not
just.
on the agenda.
I would, yeah, a couple things. Well, city council can direct the city manager, staff to bring something back in the future. That's fine. You've addressed the advisory measure. The other item that is on the agenda is whether you go to the voters to ask them to
I understand
approve
that.
the tax.
But I want
And
to do
if-
this one first to hopefully maybe make my council colleagues comfortable on when I get to that part. So is that a legit motion, first of all?
Direction to staff.
This is the direction to staff. So again, the motion is to direct the city manager to come back at with a policy at a later date. If indeed the voters adopt the tax measure and the city council adopts an ordinance to regulate cannabis, that included in that the policy to the city council is an allocation of funds based on the revenue that'll be generated from the cannabis. Does that make sense to you, City Manager Starr? You understand the motion?
Stand the motion, and we will work with it.
Any questions from the council? I need a second. Is there a second to the motion? Got a second from Councilman Johnson. Any questions on the motion? If not, can I please have electronic vote? And the motion is 3 in favor, 2 against. So you have direction, City Manager Starr. Okay, so we're going to get down to the last motion I'm going to make here, and this is regarding resolution number 22-3374. This is in regards to the business license tax to be placed on the measure. And I would add that I'm not going to read the entire ordinance, but I know that we discussed at 10% of gross receipts. And instead of being 10%, my motion will put that at 7%.
If I might get clarification, you're saying up to
Yes, up to
7%.
up to 7% of the gross receipts.
Because the ordinance itself says it's at 0% until the council takes further action. So what would go to the voters, you're saying the ballot question.
Maybe I should make sure I have the right one here now. So it's what I have in front of me says, shall the measure funding the general Montclair services, including supporting 911, police, fire responses, preventing theft, property crime, recruiting, retaining firefighters, paramedics, retaining local businesses, jobs, repairing street potholes, addressing homelessness, by taxing cannabis, retail, delivery, cultivation, manufacturing, testing business at a rate of not more than 10% of the gross receipts. So instead of saying not more than 10%, it should be not more than 7% of gross receipts. Is that the language of that?
I understand.
And then it goes on, raising about $3.5 million annually until ended by voters requiring audits, spending disclosure, funds used locally, cannabis business follow laws protecting public health safety be adopted. Am I correct? Is that the ordinance?
So you're modifying it by changing 10% to not more than 7?
Yes.
I think staff understands
Acceptable?
that.
Okay. Is there a second to my motion? No second? Anyone want to second it?
I'll second.
Okay. I have a second to the motion. Any comments on the motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Because now we're on actual final passage, basically, in putting this before the voters. Just for clarification, that would amend section 4.76.040, which is page 22 of our amended staff report. It would amend that section, subsection C, items 1 through 5 with 7%. It would strike the 10 and add 7. Correct, Madam City
Oh, yeah, as far as the
Attorney?
resolution, you're right.
And that is
Yes.
Part of the ordinance, yes.
That's the only area that specifically references that, correct?
There might be earlier, but wherever wherever the ordinance
Let's say
says
10, it would
not more
revert
than
to 7.
10, it would be not more than 7.
And that'll be part of my motion, which I believe the second agrees to it.
Here, I am speaking on the motion, Mr. Mayor. I am going to speak on this motion.
Yeah, go ahead. I just
Here-
wanted to clarify the motion, to
here-
include that language you just brought up.
Here is my hesitation as to why I voted no in the last vote. While that direction, I agree with it in directing the city manager / staff to come up with a policy that would require, the way the mayor said it was, revenue generated from cannabis taxes be given to nonprofits. Again, I voted no because I'm asking for a separate process. But in addition to that, in that vote, there's nothing guaranteeing that in the final end, that's what I'm going to get. And that's where I have hesitation. And that's why I voted no. And because of that, I'm inclined, even though I want the 7% as a cap, my vote for the 7% cap would be predicated on the guarantee that I'm going to get what I would be more comfortable with the 1% growth stipulation. And I just don't see it yet. So that's my hesitation. Now, I know I had asked if there was why the request for a special meeting was made, and it was stated that there is no longer a need. I'm assuming that's still going to be the case, and we're not going to have a special meeting sprung on us because there is suddenly a need. So, again, my vote is still predicated on a guarantee that I will get a 1% gross allocation to nonprofits from those groups and not just a general commitment. That's why I voted no in the last vote.
Well, I understand that, and and I realize politics, how politics works. I mean, we both been, well, I think most of us been involved in politics many years, and politicians act weird sometimes and have voodoo ideas and make changes. But I do know this, what I've learned is, the way it's supposed to work is this council establishes the policy to the city manager, and the city manager is supposed to carry out the policy. When I say this policy, a majority of the council, 3/4, 2/3, whatever the law mandates. And so my motion was for the basic purpose is to direct the city manager from the city council of Montclair that he bring this back. In fact, the voters approve it. It will come back, and it's a commitment that we're going to actually do, and I want to do this. Now, of course, again, I'm not sure I'll be the mayor in December. Somebody else may be sitting in the seat, but I want to do this. You got my commitment to do this, and I think you got the commitment of my two colleagues on the left, if I'm correct, to do this. And we just made a motion directing the city manager, even though it was a 3-2 vote, the city manager has directions. Do you have directions, Mr. City Manager, Starr?
I do have direction, and I do want to add that I understand Councilmember Lopez's concern. The language that is being presented to you in the ballot measure, it's at its maximum, 75 words. We can't add more language to it, so the only way that it can be achieved based on Councilmember Lopez's request is to do it through the policy that you are speaking of, Mr. Mayor.
So I want to say this. And I know I'm interrupting Councilman Lopez's time, and I'll give it back to him, is we just directed one item be on the ballot. It's going on the ballot. And the voter is going to either say yes or no that, show the Montclair City Council consider improve ordinance legalizing licensing medical adult use cannabis business in the city of Montclair. If they say yes, we're not done yet, because we're obligated by the old voters to do this. And we have to work on orders. Now, it could be that we might bring this back to the voters again in 2 years. Or maybe, I don't know, there was the franchise fee that was talked about by the city manager Starr. He's been working on for 8 years. Perhaps that's the mechanism we'll have to move forward, and the voters vote yes on this. But nevertheless, what's important tonight, I believe, is that we are giving the voters the opportunity to decide this. And that's what's important here. So we did it with the first one. If we can't get 4 votes, The first one's there, the voters say yes, we have work to do. If voters say no, you know what? I'm done. I'm gonna spend some time watching Monday Night Football and basketball, and I have to be here for council meetings. So, Councilman Lopez, is all yours.
Regarding the last vote and the direction given to the city manager and staff, Mr. City Manager, when do you anticipate drafting something with respect to meeting that direction, that requirement council just voted on?
The policy or the ordinances themselves?
The policy that the council just voted to direct you to draft.
The mayor's motion stated that the policy would be introduced after the voters rendered their opinion on the legalization issue.
So maybe the question is, Councilman Lopez is asking, if I'm correct, I apologize for interrupting you. Maybe the question is, can this policy come to the council before it goes to the voters? Is that the question you're asking, Councilman Lopez?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Can you provide us a policy before it goes to the voters?
Well, I can certainly work on a policy. The issue with the policy is that it doesn't have any merit until you adopt the ordinances. And the policy would be incorporated into the ordinance anyway, because the ordinance is what has the teeth. And we would commit to you that the ordinance will incorporate this language because you're telling us that the ordinance needs to incorporate this language. You want money to go for this purpose, and it will be in there. If we don't do it, then you will direct us at that time that that language needs to be added into the ordinance. So either way, it will be in the ordinance.
Well, but the question, I think, Councilman Lopez, if I add it to it, I know there's an ordinance afterwards and this is back and forth. The question is, can you provide us the language, a policy language that we can consider prior to the election? And if we approve this policy language, then the policy language could be added to the ordinance later on. Is that a good question, Councilman Lopez?
That is a good question, yes.
Yeah, so again, it's a difficult question to answer because I don't know what the tax rate is that you're ultimately going to agree to. Yes, it's 7% as the maximum, but when it comes to adopting the ordinance, you may say, well, you only want the tax rate to be 3%. Of that 3%, there are two ways that this can go. You're telling me, A, that of the 3%, 1% of the gross receipts, because that's what the tax rate is based on, will go towards these community services. Or you're telling me that separate from the 3%, the vendors will be required to donate 1% of their revenues to these other purposes. I would have to leave it to legal staff to tell me whether or not that would be an illegal tax on the cannabis businesses. I think that that would potentially represent that, which would mean that it becomes a 1% of the 3% or the 4% or the 5% that the tax rate is that you settle on.
Okay. I can see the complications there are. We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know yet to determine that. The best way to do it is just have a flat rate and say, this is the dollar amount we want to commit to our community. We're going to pay it either one way or another. It's coming out of the general fund. You say 100,000 or 200,000. If you just want a flat rate, and we put this on the future council meeting, and it says, okay, we're going to adopt a flat rate, and if this is adopted, this is the minimum flat rate we're going to go with. Is that a possibility, Mr. Starr?
Well, that is what is in the ordinance now, is that we require that they contribute a certain amount.
If we give you a policy amount before the election date, is that helpful, just to have a flat rate, what that number is going to be?
Well, you can, but again, it needs to go in the ordinances that you adopt.
I understand it goes in the ordinance afterwards, but I'm talking about in advance of the ordinance, in advance of the election, just a policy matter.
We will work on language and bring it to you for your consideration.
So when can you bring it back in for consideration?
Uh,
A good time. I know you got something you got to take care of.
Yeah, we have a lot of things that, that we're taking care of. But I will start working on that and have it to you as soon as I possibly can. Certainly before the November election, hopefully in, July, August, September, sometime perhaps in September.
The first meeting in October, is that?
I could certainly have it to you by the first meeting in October.
How about the first meeting in October? Does that work for everybody?
I just need time to evaluate what these other city ordinances say in this regard, particularly the Pomona one. And if it's quite clear to us that it's something that the council would be able to work with and agreeable, we will have it to you even sooner than that. but we will certainly have it to you by the first meeting in October.
Okay, I apologize, Councilmember
No, that's all right,
Lopez.
that's
Go
all
ahead.
right.
It's all,
I
it's all
actu-
yours now.
You know, I actually appreciate the banner going back and forth and the art of compromise, instead of everything appearing to be done deals, so I appreciate this. First of all, most cities that have marijuana establishments in them require that those businesses indemnify the city. So with respect to a provision in the ordinance that there is a legal defense fund for purposes of keeping the city safe, I think it'd be the best route to do what other cities do and indemnify the city if they want to operate.
Yeah, and I agree with you there.
So that's another change I want in the proposal. Again, I think it just proves that this is hastily done. But that said, I just found out Pomona requires on the business application before they're even approved, they require to name their nonprofit of choice or one or two nonprofits of choice, and then they certify that they allocated 1% of gross receipts to that entity. That is why the one business I listed picked Kennedy Park and iPoly. So if we can get some teeth in a policy like that, I would be happy. But if I'm going to be told to trust staff, trust the city manager's office, with me right now, the trust isn't there, and I would vote no.
Well, I resent that statement, but you're entitled to say it.
On this matter, that's it, on the actual language, nothing else.
Well, I'm going to call a vote for a second because I'm trying to compromise and make you comfortable as possible. But at the end of the day, you got to have trust. If you don't trust staff, you don't trust your council colleagues, then we just wasted 2 hours
I'm not
here.
saying anything about
And we
colleagues.
could have had these motions much early on and got out of here. So my question to you is: you want some on the agenda by the first meeting in October on this policy we're talking about, or are you going to vote no and we'll just move on?
I'd
and
like
we'll
it
deal
much-
with it.
I'd
We'll
like
deal
it
with
much-
under the ordinance.
I'd like it much sooner than October.
I will try and have it to you as soon as I possibly can.
That's fair. But, I mean, I still got to cast a vote tonight. So again, I'm asked to trust the process. I just can't.
Well, that's why you have motions, you direct the city manager, that's how it operates. And, you know, if you can't trust it, then, you know, then that's where you start having dysfunctional governments. So, so what is your choice, Ben? What do you like to do? You wanna, we got a motion on the floor, you can make a contingency motion to add on this item we just discussed by having it by the first meeting in October, or we can just move on and call for the vote.
Legally, can we add on to this? This is going to be the tax measure that goes to the voters. We're adding something on.
No, we're not adding anything onto the measure, we're just providing a city manager further direction.
Point of order.
Go ahead.
Madam City Attorney, there's nothing that would then preclude this body from holding a special meeting prior to the August 12th deadline to have the ordinance amended with the 7%, and then two, I know this is much quicker than October, to have the policy that I'm concerned about be submitted and presented at that meeting, correct?
I suppose theoretically that could happen. I don't know if that's possible because of the time crunch. But again, all that is before you tonight is asking the voters for the funding. Then once we know the funding is there, that's when we typically bring back to the council ordinances on these kinds of details. Because then we know that the voters have approved it, and then we get into the specifics of how it's done, what the businesses are to do, and such. But if the voters do not approve the funding, that's really the only measure that the voters have to respond to. Now, we've done the advisory one as well, because it makes sense to all of us that the council needs to know where the residents stand on the legalizing or allowing, you know, dispensaries and sales and such like that in the city. But that's why that's advisory, because that's really up to the council. And the details in these other ordinances, that's up to the council. That is reserved to the council. We're not, by approving that the measure goes to the voters on whether the voters are good with establishing a tax, that's not telling the council how to do it or what they can do or what they can't do. It's just telling you that there's a funding source, and the ordinance as drafted provides that initially the tax is zero until the council takes action. So the goal from staff's perspective is to get this on the ballot, and that has to be done by that. I mean, we have to give direction to the registrar of voters by August 12th. To flesh out the details on exactly what's done and whether it should be done like Pomona or whether it should be done like, initially proposed with all the details, that's going to come before the 5 of you, and you will make the decisions on that.
What triggered this from going, well, I guess the deadline? Because initially, I was under the impression that this was going to have at least its normal 2 readings.
All we are adopting tonight is the resolution, but it does have the ordinance attached, and it would be the first reading. The item that needs to go to the registrar of voters is the resolution that attaches the ordinance as an exhibit. That's what has to be done by August 12th. The second reading can occur after that.
Point of clarification, Madam City Attorney. When you're saying the ordinance, is this 300-page ordinance?
No. Oh, no, it's the one that was in your agenda packet. It's identical, the one that's on the dais is identical to that, except for the provision that the tax rate will be 0 until the city council takes further action. And you're most likely going to wait to take further action until you see what the voters do, whether the voters approve the advisory measure. Because that's the direction you're wanting, is from the voters. But the only way to have this in place, so if the voters say to go ahead, and then you subsequently decide whether it's going to be 1%, 3%, or some of these other things that you've asked the city manager to come back to you, you will be able to do that. That will be up to you. You are the ones that make those determinations like you do with every other action that you take as a body. You make those decisions. So you will be making those decisions, but unless the voters have approved the funding, it's all moot at that point. There would be no funds to do any of this with.
Okay, so I guess we have 3 choices. We either can just vote right now and get it over with. If we could add this thing where we direct the city manager to bring something back prior to October, first meeting in October, in addition to the adoption of this resolution, put on the ballot. Or, I don't think it's possible now, we can have a special meeting and come back and think more about this, but I know that all of us probably have schedule conflicts here the next 7 days to make this happen. So, I'm not sure, maybe I'll stab at something and we'll also see where it goes. So I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna remove my last motion, which I believe you agree with me. And I move that we consider adoption of resolution number 22-3374. And this is to place this measure on the ballot, the tax measure. And again, it will be for no more than 7% of the gross receipts. They'll include that. Obviously, it will correct the ordinance, the 10% to 7% of the ordinance. and then city attorney will correct me if I'm doing this wrong, and that city manager is directed to bring something back prior to the first meeting of October regarding this policy that we keep talking about, based on the prior motion we made to direct them that now he'll bring it back prior to the October meeting. Am I correct in that motion? Is that and in addition to that, the adoption of, just for clarification, adoption of first reading of ordinance number 22-9999.
I'll second.
We got a second by Councilmember Martinez. And so that's the motion on the floor. Any questions on the motion for clarification? If there is none, let's just have an electronic vote then. Has everybody voted?
No, I'm still.
Okay, no problem, we'll wait.
Comment was made by a colleague that this was perhaps, or a vote was cast against their better judgment. I'm inclined to feel that way as well on this vote. I'm just uneasy because I don't have assurances. I am not. Because I do not want my position to be misconstrued, lied, and made up crap about with respect to me from people at the podium or in the press. I am not opposed to marijuana establishments within the city limits and them doing their business. There's just certain things that I think need to come with it.
All right, Mr. Lopez, this is probably a good time to vote.
And I don't have those assurances at the moment. But against my better judgment, and for anybody that wants to criticize me either out there or from this dais, you better remember my vote.
Okay, and the vote is 4-1. So with that, that is adopted. I know you have to read something there. Something, City Clerk, excuse me. It's too late now. It's time to go to bed.
I know. Ordinance number 22-999, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Montclair, adding Chapter 4.76 to Title 4 of the Montclair Municipal Code, related to imposing a cannabis business license tax subject to final approval by the voters at the Tuesday, November 8, 2022 general municipal election.
Thank you. And Councilman Lopez, I know that was a hard decision for you, and I want to guarantee you, of course, I'm not be here in December again.
Get me a fire engine.
We're gonna get you a fire engine too. I want a fire engine as well, but I'm gonna guarantee you that we're gonna prepare an ordinance, what you asked for in terms of the community benefits. I want to work with you on that as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We're gonna move on. We have consent calendar items, and
I'd like to pull item number C2.
all right, hold on.
I as well.
Slow down. Okay, so C2. All right, C2 it is. Anybody else on my left have an item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, one item I was going to ask to pull, but rather than ask to pull that item, I would ask that Director Richter come back at a future date and talk to us about the changes to the Montclair to College program, because it's different than how it's been in past years. So we can't talk about it tonight, but at a future date, if you could share that information with us. And then I have one quick question about item C1.
Okay, C1 it is. Nobody else? Okay, you're first up, Denise.
Okay, my simple question is on page 37. It's about the street maintenance, and I'm concerned, not concerned, I have a question about item Z on page 37 of 77, trash collection daily Monday through Friday. So I just want to clarify that I understand that there are people walking through the city Monday through Friday, picking up trash off our streets. That's not the trash truck, that's humans doing that from Mariposa. Is that correct?
Well, yes, but it's dealing with trash on the medians and whatever else we contract with, like parks or the Trans Center.
Okay, so it's not on every curb, but
No.
but every day somebody's reaching out to pick up stuff off the ground. That's what I want to hear.
Well, during the weekdays, not the
Through Friday,
weekends.
Monday through Friday. Okay, that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Okay, item C2, who wants to lead off?
Actually, real quickly, Mr. Mayor, on that topic,
One?
the other, something piqued my interest when I read this. On page 37 of our staff agenda, the Pacific Electric Bike Trail, to be cleaned once per month, is that, and first of all, let me back up. Is that only if we use them, they will do it once a month, or that's the stipulation, we will only require them to clean it once a month?
Well, in this particular provision, it's once a month. The trail is actually kept fairly clean, and it's split jointly between the city of Upland and Montclair, and we're actually responsible for a very small section of it. And so I think at this point in time, once a month probably is sufficient, but primarily because our own staff does a lot of work up there, particularly as it deals with homeless and moving out encampments.
That's what I was going to get at, because of the incident which started the fire down there was attributed to perhaps some illegal encampments and starting a fire to cook. So I was going to say, if they would check it more often, we might be able to avoid that habitation and whatnot there. And that was my only concern. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, item C2, I believe. C2?
Yes, I pulled this item because I'm trying to find out the funding source for this.
Funding source, where is that?
It may have been in there and I didn't see it. It's just,
It's an economic development fund.
It's going to be economic development.
Yes.
So the city's going to be advocating for this.
No, the city is only going to be educating.
How do we educate then? Do we do
By-
a pro and a con side on it? Are we going to issue things like other places do? Here's the pro, here's the con.
That's effectively the same process that we used with relation to Measure L. It's the same company that we hired for that purpose, and they simply put out the facts of what the issue is that you're dealing with and you're trying to represent to the public.
What I heard from residents, that issue sounded a little biased. That's how I felt about it. I'd prefer straight pro and cons.
On Measure L, are you saying it was biased?
I thought it was a little bit biased, but that's okay. I mean, I was for that measure. I'd like to, I'm sorry, I can't support the item, so I'll just come up front with it.
Okay, any other comments on C2?
No, I also, again, I had asked this, I believe, when we hired the firm. I had some reservation about them extrapolating the polling data and it not being misconstrued as a campaign piece for or against. So that is my concern as well. But I do know that it was done with Measure L. I wasn't on council at the time. I just don't, I can't grasp how a piece cannot be perceived as non-biased when it's advocating for something. But if it's going to have, if we're kind of like the equal time clause from years ago with respect to political campaigns, that if you gave one person or entity or issue a equal time, you have to give the other, and that's where I kind of would be a little bit more concerned about it, or at least comfortable rather. But anyways, here we are. Those are my reservations, that's all.
And I will point out, when Measure L was being sponsored, there was actually a opponent to Measure L who put out a piece against Measure L.
And they paid for, whether it was their own money or money that they raised.
Correct.
And they disclosed it on 460s legally, so that was clearly their prerogative and legal. But here's another thing I want assurances on. There will be no mention of providing drinking water sources in those materials. Because when I hear of drinking water sources, I drink of a water fountain at Saratoga Park. And that's what most people think of when they see that language. And that is simply, we do provide the fountain, but we do not provide the water. I don't want any water in any of their promotional pieces, and I'll be pretty ticked off if there is.
We will not talk about drinking water.
In fact, before they send them out, are we able to review them in advance?
Well, we haven't done that before, but I suppose that we can certainly give advance copies to the council.
Thank you.
I'd appreciate it.
If I might mention, I'm very focused on whether what goes out is educating or advocating. And so I review this, this information very carefully to make sure it's objective and neutral. And, and staff can attest to that.
We can.
I want to say this, that we're asking the voters to decide if cannabis in Montclair should be legal or regulated or not. And obviously, we're asking the voters in Montclair if it should be taxed. And it's really, really important that the materials that we put out through this is very, very educational. And I know we can't advocate, but I just want this to be basically black and white, meaning that it's educational. The voters are told what this is for, what cannabis is. The city council still has adopted an ordinance later on. Tax, it goes into the general fund, it supports all these services. And, we're real clear what this is all about. And that.
Mr. Mayor, respectfully, we need to also make sure this doesn't look like this is a special tax. One of the issues I had, and although I supported Measure L, is that it looked like a special tax. We had all these things we would use it for. I have heard council members and others say, oh, well, we passed Measure L. We said we'd use it for this. We said we'd use it for that. That becomes a special tax. And
Right.
that's why I feel more comfortable reviewing these items. If I can't review the things that go out, then I can't vote on this tonight.
Right,
Thank
and
you.
well, I understand your concern, Councilman, Mayor Pro Tem Rue, but I think what I'm trying to say, it's important, we just educate the public why it's there, they understand it, and they need to decide yes or no. We can't tell them how to vote yes or no, but just make sure there's a lot of text, and you don't have to pull a lot of pictures. They just have the text, they can read it on their own, and make a decision how they want to go about it. So, let's just make it simple here. Let's vote on C2 first. Item C2, I'll move for approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Martinez. Let's have an electronic vote on item C2. Okay, that's 3-2, passed. And then for the remainder of the consent calendar, can I have a motion?
So moved as presented.
Second, I'll second the motion, moved by Councilman Lopez. Let's have electronic vote. All right. Okay. Communication. Police Department. You don't have to, you have anything you want to say special? Make it quick.
Super quick. I just wanted to invite you guys to National Night Out tomorrow and just let you know that as with the previous years, we have a blood drive that's incorporated into it. Starts at 2 p.m. in the community center, ends at 8 p.m. National Night Out, 6:30 to 10 with the movie of Lucas. So if you have an opportunity, be there, and
I'll be there. I'll be there and I'll be square.
All right.
All right, good. Thank you. City Attorney.
Yes, I've got the 3 items as indicated on the agenda. I'll certainly be quick on 2 and 3, and it's up to the city manager on 1. So that's labor negotiations with our labor negotiator, Mr. Starr. That's to meet in closed session regarding public employee discipline dismissal, and then to meet in closed session regarding the pending litigation indicated. Other than those 3 items, I have nothing else this evening.
City Manager.
No items.
Myself, tonight I'd like to adjourn the meeting in the memory of our county assessor, county recorder and assessor, Bob Dutton. He passed away this past week, and obviously he was a longtime member. He was a state senator, state assembly member, and a member of the City Council of Rancho Cucamonga. He was, I think, age of 71. I also like to adjourn this meeting, and thank you, Bill. Linda Camacho. She's the mother-in-law of George Talese. George is a former Community Activities Commissioner. She was a longtime Montclair resident since 1972. And finally, I'd like to adjourn this meeting in the memory of Fred Rodello. He is the father-in-law of Richard Escalante, who is a member of the Community Activities Commission as well. And obviously his wife, Annette, is the daughter of Fred. And so we'll put all these families in prayers from the city of Montclair. Thank you. Where my left want to go?
No, I was gonna mention National Night Out also, but the blood drive starts at 2 o'clock. So if anyone's interested, they can show up early, get that wrapped up, and then head over for snacks.
Okay, go ahead, Councilman Johnson.
Yeah, I had several chamber events to announce, but I think I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just put them on social media. But there is one that I want to talk about. I hope the public will hear it. OPark is having a hiring event on August 9th and August 11th. And on both days, the hiring event is from 9 to noon, and then again from 4 to 7. And that's at OPark here in Montclair. So you can find more information online, but I just wanted to make sure that people knew about that hiring event. And the rest I'll put on social media. That concludes my comment.
Councilor Lopez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will make this quickly as well. I've known Bob Dutton since the 90s, back when he was on the Rancho Cucamonga City Council. One thing that he did that wasn't popular then, and it probably not popular now, even with some of the cities in the region, is he fought to have that city's utility tax reversed and money rebated back to the city. And I think that is to be commendable. And I worked with him when I lobbied in Sacramento and my short stint in working with Governor Schwarzenegger. He was in the legislature and he was instrumental in helping me out there. But the work that he did, he was one to get things accomplished without taking the glory or the credit for it. And that was Bob Dutton. His city and his region will definitely miss him. My condolences and best wishes to Andrea, who I've known for years, his wife, and his daughter, Kara. But he was a dynamic fighter for this region in San Bernardino County. And Linda Camacho actually has a tie to my family. That is, Linda was or is still, I mean, just because they're past doesn't mean the relation goes away, is my godmother's sister. That was one of her older sisters. It hits at home, and I knew Linda was sick for a while and got word the day that she had passed from my godmother. So I appreciate the city and the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Rue acknowledging Linda Camacho. I coach Little League with her son-in-law, so we do have some ties. And that family has deep roots in this city, and they don't just simply live here and go to work and come back. They actually invest and give back, and they are to be commended. So Godspeed to Bob Dutton and Linda Camacho. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I will keep it short as well. August 5th is the grand opening for Rhino Records. I do work that day, but I wish them well. They're a great addition to our city. I've known Bob Dutton since 1988. Remember when he was president of the Building Industry Association? That's when I first got to know him. His wife, Andrea, his daughter, Kara, we've stayed in touch over all these years. And in my professional life, Bob was always very easy to work with, very great to deal with. And I know he wouldn't mind me saying this. He was one of the legislators in Sacramento who actually could sit down with the other side of the aisle and do a lot of things. He never let the party get in the way. He was a party man as far as his beliefs, but he could work with the other side of the aisle. And I think if you look back far enough, people like Cheryl Brown, Wilmer Carter would tell you Bob was great to work with. They hammered out deals, got things done for the benefit of the Inland Empire and actually all of Southern California. And with Linda Camacho, yes, she was truly a part of this community, and people may remember George Tellez was a community activities commissioner. He is now running the Golden Girls program, or helping to coach and run that, doing a great job continuing to give back, and they're a family that wants to give back. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go into closed session now. Thank you.